Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will call to order, please. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Excuse me, councillors, could I ask everyone to check that they're signed in, please?
Okay. So, as a special council meeting, we will skip over most of the usual parts that we would be dealing with. So we're going to move right to Committee of the Whole. So the first thing that I'm going to do is ask for a motion to resolve into Committee of the Whole to consider the Code of Conduct, complaint protocol, and a bylaw to establish an accountability framework for the City of Kingston to Council. Moved by Deputy Mayor Neal, seconded by Councillor Schell. Please vote. And that carries. So we're now in Committee of the Whole, and at this point we will ask for report number 37 from the CAO. Does someone want to, did we just say the report's on the floor? Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do with report number 37, we're going to do the briefing first, and then we're actually going to put the report on the floor. So at this point, my pleasure to introduce Janet Leeper, Interim Integrity Commissioner, and John Mascarin, partner at Airden Bayless LLP, who are here tonight to brief Council on the Member Code of Conduct, complaint protocol, and a bylaw to establish an accountability framework for the City of Kingston. So welcome to both of you. You have the floor. If you want to run through your presentation at that point, then I'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and staff. It's my pleasure to be here with Janet this evening to speak to you about the proposed code of conduct and the accountability ethical framework for the wonderful city of Kingston. Have a very brief presentation. Janet and I are going to split it up in about half. I'll do a general overview just to give you a little bit of general context, and I appreciate that you have heard maybe some of this before. Something that I may speak to you about that you haven't heard before, some proposals from the province with Bill 68 that is proposed to change the accountability framework that municipalities will now be under, and I'll address those briefly and then turn the presentation over to Janet for the actual policies, the code of conduct, the complaint protocol, and the bylaw that you're going to be considering. Just let me say, as just a preface to everything that I'm going to say. I once worked for a gentleman, I was fortunate enough early in my career to work for a gentleman who was known as the Dean of Municipal Law in Ontario. I was privileged to do so. His name is Robert W. McCauley. I didn't work with him very long, and most of his former juniors had said no one stays with Bob very long. But what he used to say to me, and I'm going to paraphrase this, is he used to say to me, okay, explain this to me, young man, as if you were explaining it to your mother so she could understand it. When I look at codes of conduct, I look at this and say, this is commonsensical courtesy, integrity, ethics, something that your mother would be proud of you if you were to be guided by. So if you get bogged down in anything that Janet and I say, just think back as to what your mom would want you to do in a certain situation, okay? So, Quickly, I'll go through the accountability and transparency framework in the Municipal Act and in Bill 68, and I'll speak about the role of Integrity Commissioner. I should also note, like Janet, I am an Integrity Commissioner currently for 5 municipalities, one on an interim basis. They're all municipalities far away from where I'm actually situated, and that's so I won't breach any ethical guidelines with my firm doing potential business in that particular municipality. So here's the outline. Janet's going to talk about the proposed policies in front of you, the principles-based code of conduct, the complaint protocol process, and the accountability framework. So, as you probably know, the reason we're talking about all of this today is because in 2006, the province of Ontario put in place a new part in the Municipal Act 5.1, which is called Accountability and Transparency. Now, this followed the requirements in the City of Toronto Act, which followed some of the recommendations put forward by Commissioner Bellamy in the Toronto MFP leasing scandal of the late 1990s, early 2000s. And what came forward from the province was that, well, if it's good for the City of Toronto, then it should be proper maybe for every municipality to have. So all of a sudden, you have these accountability measures, the accountability and transparency provisions in the City of Toronto Act, and they're largely replicated for all municipalities in the Municipal Act 2001. Now, when I say largely replicated, there is one significant difference. In the City of Toronto, the accountability officers and codes of conduct were mandated. They weren't permissive, they were mandatory. The City of Toronto had to have those. Janet was the Integrity Commissioner for the City of Toronto, a mandated official in the City of Toronto. For all other municipalities in Ontario, the provisions were made permissive. They weren't mandatory. A municipality could decide whether it would have a code of conduct. It could decide whether it was going to have an ombudsperson. Actually, I'm being politically correct. The ombudsman, still the term that's used, or an auditor general, or lobbyist registrar. Some of that is changing, and I'll speak to it in just a moment. And at the very bottom of the slide, you'll also see that I also mentioned closed meeting investigations, not actually part of 5.1, but also added in at approximately the same time, where municipalities all of a sudden could have people come before them and say, you know what, we don't think you went into a closed meeting properly. We don't think you followed your procedural bylaw. We think you've breached 239(2) of the Municipal Act. And someone could come and do an investigation and write a report. In cases where a municipality didn't appoint someone, it would be the Ontario Ombudsman, and that caused a little bit of tension and friction. So, here's some changes to the Municipal Act, just what I've said. Bill 68 just passed second reading at the province, now been referred to a committee for final consideration and possible amendments and changes. Substantial, very significant changes to the regime dealing with accountability and transparency here in Ontario. Codes of conduct is going to change. The Integrity Commissioner's powers and jurisdiction, including never before seen, new to be implemented authority under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act to make inquiries regarding contraventions of the statute and to make applications to the court. The status as of just a few days ago passed second reading and now has been referred to the Standing Committee on Social Policy. So, what's changing? Codes of conduct. The changes are highlighted in the purple text. A municipality now shall establish a code of conduct. Now, City of Kingston has had one. It's had one for a number of years. There are a number of municipalities in Ontario who have deemed it not appropriate for them to have codes of conduct. They now have to have mandatory codes of conduct. Subsection 1 changes by making it mandatory. 2 pretty much remains the same. Sub 3 is new, but part of it was there. A contravention of a code of conduct cannot constitute an offense, and now cannot require the member who has contravened to pay an administrative penalty. As you might know, under Bill 68, the administrative penalty provisions have been broadened substantially. I think right now you can only impose administrative penalties for parking matters. It's been expanded considerably, but that's not something that can be imposed on a member that's contravened the code of conduct. 4 is very important. The province has taken it upon itself to say, we will dictate certain aspects of the code of conduct. There are things that the minister is going to make a regulation and say, these will form core concepts, core provisions in a code of conduct. And the municipality then is free to create whatever other framework, other provisions that it deems appropriate. Don't know what those are yet. We've had some briefings, but I think the province has been very close-lipped as to exactly what those provisions may be. So, when Bill 68 is enacted, you're going to have mandatory codes of conduct for all municipalities in Ontario, and certain aspects of it will be dictated by the province. Now, the role of the Integrity Commissioner, wow, this moves really quickly. Can't keep my finger down on it too quick, eh? Okay. The services. I've pulled these from the Toronto Computer Leasing Inquiry, the Public Inquiry Commission report of Commissioner Bellamy. And she highlights that the effective Integrity Commissioner system provides for 2 fundamentally basic services. The first one is an advisory service, where the Integrity Commissioner can speak to members of council, discuss with them, and give them advice, give staff advice on how matters under the Code of Conduct are to be handled in a particular case, and also sometimes in a very general way. And 2, there's the investigative and enforcement service, which is to go in and look at complaints, possible breaches, contraventions, on behalf of a member of council as to the code of conduct. Commissioner Bellamy also went on and highlighted the value of having this system. In a municipal government, the office of the Integrity Commissioner is valuable for the following reasons. The first one, provides a degree of consistency in the application of the code. It would do you no good to have a different person come in and give you advice every other week. So, best thing you could do, appoint an Integrity Commissioner, appoint them with a security of tenure over a period of time, and have that person who's qualified and who knows the municipal milieu and who knows code of conduct, the ethical framework, knows something about administrative law, to come in and tell you how it applies. Second bullet, busy councillors and staff cannot be expected to track with precision the development of ethical norms. The Integrity Commissioner, therefore, can serve as an important source of ethical expertise. Again, someone who knows the area and who knows something about how municipal government operates, who knows that you members of council are elected representatives and you have a certain specific role. You have a function, you have certain obligations, and you're representatives of your communities. Integrity Commissioner also provides a significant profile, gives some status to the entire regime, the accountability ethical framework, and can send important messaging to your community as to how the code of conduct is to be applied and how it will be applied. Advice and guidance, something that I mentioned briefly earlier. Authoritative advice and guidance is what Commissioner Bellamy said in her report. And finally, the last one, without enforcement, the rules are only guidelines. Where the public interest is involved, there should be a deterrent in the form of consequences for bad behavior. The rules must have teeth. Now, some Integrity Commissioners will say, well, there's very little teeth. We got baby teeth in what the Municipal Act currently permits and allows. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, and we can speak a little bit about that. The role of the Integrity Commissioner, again, here is the section that's proposed to be amended by Bill 68. Again, the changes are in purple text. Before it used to have only what's 1 and 2 there. It used to be 223.3 sub 1 A and B. It's been expanded now to the Integrity Commissioner may do any of the following: application of Section 5 and 2 new sections of the MCIA, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Integrity Commissioner never had an authority, a jurisdiction before with municipal conflict of interest. Now the Integrity Commissioner will have a significant role dealing with the MCIA. Look at number 4, conducting of inquiries now on the Integrity Commissioner's own initiative. That's not any longer a complaint-based code. The Integrity Commissioner may see something, may decide on his or her own initiative to go in and make an inquiry and investigate and report. Requests from members of council respecting their obligations. Now it's been enshrined, and there are some specifications as to how that's going to be dealt with. Requests from members of council for advice respecting their obligations under other procedures, rules, or policies of the municipality governing ethical conduct. So it's not only, the code of conduct. You can go and ask the Integrity Commissioner to talk about other things. For instance, social media policy, any other policy that you may have that possibly goes to any kind of ethical behavior. You can ask the Integrity Commissioner for advice. Requests from members of council for advice respecting their obligations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Before this, what you had to do is go and get your own opinion from a lawyer. Now you can go and get some advice from the Integrity Commissioner, and that advice will factor in to what may happen if there's a contravention of the Act. And finally, very importantly, the provision of educational information to members of council, but to local boards, the municipalities, and the public about the municipality's code of conduct and the MCIA. I like the last part, which is the public, educating the public, because I think there's a misconception out there as to what this accountability framework may actually deal with. As an Integrity Commissioner, I often get things written to me saying, I want this member off council. Boot them off council. I can't do that. And there's what's a conflict of interest? We'll talk about all of those things. So all these changes now being proposed by Bill 68, including, of course, the mandatory requirement to have an Integrity Commissioner or to have the services of an Integrity Commissioner available to members of council to do some of this. There may be certain aspects of this that maybe your Integrity Commissioner maybe is not the person that you want necessarily to do, or maybe the Integrity Commissioner feels that they shouldn't be doing something. You can have an arrangement where those particular services may be provided by someone else. So, new requirements respecting the Integrity Commissioner's advice from the Integrity Commissioner must be in writing, and the council members' requests for advice from the Integrity Commissioner must also be in writing, and, of course, should fully disclose the factual situation so that the Integrity Commissioner can actually give a knowledgeable determination, assessment of what's before you. If you hold back any facts, then the advice may not be worth it. So now they both have to be in writing. And as I've said before, if there's no Integrity Commissioner appointed, a municipality must somehow make arrangements to use another municipality's Integrity Commissioner or provide the services through another means. So in summary, and I've gotten to the end of my portion, The accountability and transparency provisions that we're going to be talking tonight arise primarily through 5.1 of the Municipal Act. They also, of course, are residing in the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. The Municipal Act authorizes municipalities and mandates municipalities, once Bill 68 is in force, to establish codes of conduct. A code of conduct is a general statement that establishes and maintains standards of appropriate conduct to foster public confidence and trust. It is not an encyclopedia where you can go and find every particular instance of what you may have as an issue and go, there it is. That's the answer. No, it's a general statement with general principles and some specific guidelines as to how you are to conduct yourselves. Compliance of the Code of Conduct is accomplished through the advice services provided by your hopefully very expert integrity commissioner, and they can be provided individually to members of council if asked for in writing and provided in writing, or generally to council as a whole. Also to the public, and the investigation and resolution of complaints by the Integrity Commissioner may lead to a report and the possible recommendation of penalties, and then Council can decide whether to impose penalties. That's not within the purview of your Integrity Commissioner. The decision to impose a penalty is on Council. That's Council's decision. Janet and I, as Integrity Commissioners, only recommend penalties if we find that there's a contravention. And that's up to Council. Council can decide whether they want to or not to impose the penalties. And finally, Bill 68, which we think may be becoming law sometime in the spring, late spring, maybe, if passed, will mandate those services and mandate codes of conduct for all municipalities. So, need to be prepared, and that's why we're here. I'll turn it over to Janet Leeper. Sorry, if you press too long.
This always happens when I step up to this podium. Thank you, Don. Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's good to be back and talk to you again about some of the things we started talking about last December. Before I look at the slides, a little bit of context for this part of the presentation. When this council enacted a code of conduct in 2010, you set out for the city of Kingston the intention to abide by the highest standards of ethical conduct. That comes straight from your current code of conduct. And in doing so, you owned the fact that the city would be supported and served by an ethical set of guidelines and framework. So you, in a way, are very much ahead of a number of municipalities, having done so at that time. But in the other side of the equation, by not having advice services and by not having a whole framework, you were missing some of the critical pieces that we're bringing before you tonight to have you consider enacting. So in 2016, you requested a review of the Code of Conduct, a process by way of a complaint protocol that would set out how complaints would come through the Integrity Commissioner. And in addition, you'll see the third piece, a bylaw that deals with that official and how to ensure independence of the role, because these are really critical pieces of any accountability framework. You have to have somebody who is independent enough of council and of the issues within the city to be able to give you completely objective advice, somebody with experience, and you're going to attract that kind of candidate by making sure that you have provisions in place to ensure independence so that the job can be done properly. So as a package, the pieces we're going to look at tonight create a framework for how to address the issues that arise in public life and that can arise from the code of conduct that you have put in place, the current code, and the provisions that are here for you to consider. So before we look at the specifics, I want to acknowledge a couple of truths about public life that I've seen in dealing with members of council. The first is, it is a difficult and demanding role, and people who have never run for public office do not always appreciate how demanding it is, and at times thankless. A code of conduct reflects the reality that the obligations that this council has seen fit to put in place are higher than they are for the average citizen who is coming into contact with city services. That's a reality. You're held to a higher standard. and that's because your role involves public trust. However, the opposite side of the coin, there's always another side to the coin. It isn't all a bad news story. The fact is that, as you know, working as a counselor can be immensely satisfying. It's a very wonderful opportunity to serve the public. This code of conduct piece allows you the opportunity to wrestle with some sometimes difficult concepts and ideas, notions of conflict of interest. You get to debate them, you get to talk about them with your peers, and really public life is a place for you to grow as adults and to really navigate a rather complex world, and the world gets more complex all the time. So I wanted to kind of set that as kind of an overarching philosophy that's at play, and it runs through all of this. Expectations, standards, accountability, they're part of the job. But the good news is perfection is not the standard. It's absolutely not the standard. That's why a framework like this includes the ability to seek out advice. It avoids the constant bombardment of perhaps small complaints, frivolous complaints, unfounded complaints. There are protections built in for members, otherwise you would be spending all your time perhaps fending off frivolous complaints from people who might have an agenda or political view that's different from yours. This is part of the balance that has to be achieved. So what we're bringing before you tonight, and it's been the product of work with John and some consultation with staff, so more than one set of eyes has seen what you were about to look at, and I'm sure some of you have read it in advance, is a best effort to provide you with a wraparound framework to meet these sometimes competing objectives. So I see what you mean, this thing's sensitive. So we'll start with the Code of Conduct itself. It's got really, there are two ways to think of what's in it, or there are two pieces in it. It sets that high standard that you've already said you wanted to set for yourselves. It includes a set of principles, which generally would not be things that someone would blow the whistle on, but that are there to inform advice and interpretation of the specific thou shalt nots. So if you want to think of it as principles plus rules, that's kind of a useful way to think of the framework. So on this slide, you'll see some of those statements of principle. Being conscientious. This does not mean that the integrity commissioner is your supervisor, or that people can complain, you know, this counselor didn't phone me back in an hour and didn't meet certain service principles. That's not what that means. It means that these principles are there to inform how to look at the later, more specific principles. Now, one of you had raised with us the bullet on page 2 under abiding by the laws of the province and pointed out that it says there, abide by the letter. And the question was put, why doesn't it say the letter and the spirit of the laws? I tend to agree that would be a useful amendment, and it may be that at some point you may wish to think about some amendment. So I raise that and thank the councillor who raised it. I think it's a reasonable add that I will leave for your consideration, your debate. Okay. So much of what's in the draft Code of Conduct that you see is in your current Code of Conduct, but then there are specific provisions, many of which come from other codes of conduct in use around the province, that we are recommending to you. And some of them reflect your obligations under workplace harassment legislation, the discrimination harassment in Section 10 is an example. Improper use of influence is an area that counselors are often tempted by others to enter into. And this is a significant section that gets applied a lot in public life. People, unknowing that they might be asking you to breach your ethical obligations, may try to get you to use influence improperly. So this provision invites you to think about, what's my role? What is appropriate for the public? But what's the line between the use of my power, because you do have power. You have power by virtue of information you receive, by virtue of your ability to vote, and always understanding that it's being used in the public good is a very key principle. We've talked about conflicts of interest, and I have a few slides to show you to go back and do a little bit of review. We talked about that in December when we met. Conflicts of interest has been part of your code, and you've been enjoined to avoid conflicts of interest. The notion of apparent and real gets at the fact that for many members of the public, They will not know all the facts around a given situation. They see you from afar. So the notion of an apparent conflict of interest is bound up in the idea that from afar, someone may know 3 or 4 facts, and from afar it looks to them as if maybe you're being tempted to go a certain way because of those facts. And the notion behind avoiding conflicts of interest, apparent and real, first of all, it doesn't always mean you don't vote. It will depend. Every conflict of interest situation is unique and fact-specific. And as we heard, we can't provide an encyclopedia of conflict that would allow you to just look up every example. It's not possible. But the benefit of having it stated is that it reflects the law. For example, in Ontario, conflict of interest is a common law idea as well as under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And it's often at the heart of everything that a public official does that can get them into trouble if there's a conflict of interest. It's something that the public has a keen nose for. And so the ability to have this in your code of conduct puts it right in the wheelhouse of your integrity commissioner for advice. No question is too small. If it's troubling you in any way at all, it can be brought forward. And there it is. You have the benefit of advice and you have the benefit of an opinion in writing that will then, as you will see when we get to the complaint protocol, protect you if somebody complains later. So that's an important one I wanted to highlight. Council policy adherence. This bundles up any other policies that you may pass for yourselves and provides a place to enforce it. So policy is meaningless unless there's some way to make sure that people can be encouraged to follow that policy, and that's why that's in your code. The idea is that you at least have one place where it's very clear what are the rules, what happens if I breach the rules, and that it will be covered by advice. Election activity, again, this is a very important, and you see this in many codes of conduct around the province, Ottawa, Toronto, for example, that you're not going to be using your public persona, you're not going to be using the resources of the city or staff of the city to run for election. There's that separation, the nonpartisan side of the city that it has to be respected. Cooperation with investigations and anti-reprisal. This is to ensure that obviously investigations can be conducted in a meaningful way. As you probably know, the Municipal Act provides the power for integrity commissioners to go into any city place to request any information in the control of the city. And this is the countervailing piece that requires some degree of cooperation and to make sure that anyone who is the subject of an investigation doesn't try to thwart it, because that would lead to extreme public cynicism if that could be done. And finally, the penalties were there all along. They're from the Municipal Act. This code of conduct adds other what we would call remedial actions that you wouldn't think of as a penalty so much, but as ways to make it right. And the observation that I have after 5 years in Toronto is that many times members who have had a complaint and it's brought to council and it's public, these are opportunities for resolution, and they tend to be rare, few and far between, but that the public actually is forgiving of breaches, that the details of the breach are put out in front of council. Some kind of action may or may not be taken, and sometimes it's never needed because somebody decides they will apologize. For example, the public seems to turn the page. They seem to turn the page and move on, and I've watched that happen over and over, even in situations where members have lost their pay. And I think it's because what's happened is you've given the public a voice in between elections. You've given them a way to have, that there's some kind of consequence. There's some kind of accountability, but it need not necessarily be political accountability. Conflict of interest. We'll speak about it briefly. And this, you know, you're subject to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. John referred to that. Your code of conduct has always included a broader sense of conflict of interest. We have included that in this draft, and you will see that. It's a broader concept than the MCIA. And I think it protects you. Quite frankly, I think it's better. If you narrow it down, I have watched people in the community who do not understand that even though a policy allows a councillor to do something, if the public hates what's happening, they will punish council over and over for doing it. And I'm not saying you're at risk of that. I am pointing out that by actually setting a higher standard, you are creating a document that has strength and that it protects you. So I wanted to make that point. We talked about this before. Conflicts of interest occur in an infinite variety of forms. That's the nature of the beast. This is one definition. We were asked in advance, well, what's an apparent conflict of interest? I'll just let you read this yourselves. I don't need to read it to you. You may have other definitions. But again, it's about the available facts that somebody outside of your inner circle, somebody who's not you, looks at and says, it looks like that person's being pulled in two directions, by a private interest and by their public duty. And it doesn't mean there's an actual conflict. It doesn't mean that you might not vote the way you would have voted if that fact didn't exist. But if somebody can see facts that reasonably, we aren't talking about made up facts, but could reasonably look like that tension exists, that's the trigger that says, you know what, I think I'll get some advice. I'll think I'll find out what the right thing to do might be. And again, infinite variety of forms, a number of possible responses. They may not all be the same response. It will depend. Here are some examples of conflict. And these things can come up anywhere. There's nothing wrong, actually, with having a conflict. It's how we deal with them. We have them all the time. Lawyers get them, judges get them, municipal officials get them. We are multifaceted creatures, and we have responsibilities and interests in many different places. I'm going to move to the complaint protocol. This is a very important document for all of you, because before, you didn't have set out anywhere what the jurisdiction would be, what were the procedures, and it could mean that complaints might come to you in different doors at different times. And it doesn't help the public, because it means there's sort of a skewed understanding of how the code of conduct is to work. This sets it out. That's one benefit. The second benefit is it sets a bar for when investigation can happen, because an integrity commissioner has a number of powers that include access to those documents I talked about, but also under the Public Inquiries Act, the ability to summons witnesses under oath. And in order to trigger the use of those powers, there need to be some basic steps set out in place before you even get there. So the steps that are in this complaint protocol include a sworn affidavit setting out what section of the code, what are the details, and some reasonable and probable grounds for saying there's been a breach of the code. So that being a legal term that really says subjective and objective. So somebody can't just send in an email and saying, I think that counselor's in breach of the code. Go and basically do an inquisition. It's not a high commission. It has to be circumscribed. It has to have some objective basis. It has to be in writing and an affidavit. There is a second part to the complaint protocol later on that talks about when the integrity commissioner can decline to investigate. There have to be grounds. And I'm not going to take you to the specific pieces. It's not a long document. I'm sure you've read it. We can handle it in questions if you have questions about the wording. I'm giving you the high-level idea behind it that I think is important for you to consider having. It provides timelines. It provides the integrity commissioner with when to report and what to report to you. It protects counselors. Section 9 is an important one that I'll mention to you. If you seek advice, disclose all of the facts that were relevant to the seeking of the advice and receive advice in writing. You can rely on the advice later if there is a complaint about that matter. And this is something that has been used in the City of Toronto and in a number of other jurisdictions. It also has the informal complaint mechanism. This is an area that we watched in Toronto grow from just a handful a year to over 40 by, I think, the third or fourth year of my term there. And what this was is an opportunity for mediation, discussion. It's not a formal complaint that comes on the floor of council and is reported. It's faster. It's often better, especially if it involves a relationship. It's often better if it's a complaint from staff, because very often staff do not want to raise what you might call a more minor, but still significant enough to bother them, complaint about something in relation to a counselor, but they may want some way to have some redress. It may be interpersonal relationships between counselors. And it may look to you like a sort of soft form of discipline, but believe me, when people have to work together day in and day out, it is good to have a continuum of tools to address issues. And this one I have seen be particularly effective. So I recommend to you that this part be part of your complaint protocol. And it's interesting because even in the year that I've been your interim integrity commissioner, I've seen the same breakdown of how things are being addressed as I saw at the City of Toronto. So as of tonight, 12 requests for advice, and that's really just since last fall. There have been 7 complaints, 2 reports to council, but the rest of them have either been resolved informally or were dismissed. So already you're seeing that not everything, not every issue becomes a formal complaint, a matter for council agenda. And ideally, what do you want to see? You don't want to see none, ever. You might suspect that people are cynical or don't think your complaint process works. You would wonder if you never ever had a complaint, even a minor one. But you don't want to see everyone becoming that, because then it means nobody's asking for advice, no one's reaching out to try to resolve issues up front proactively. And what you're seeing is kind of a similar curve to what we saw in Toronto and what I suspect you see in some of the other municipalities. So those are the high-level pieces of the complaint protocol that are before you, as well as a form, the actual form. I think the question was asked, how will the public know? This would go on the website. This is what other municipalities do, and I expect yours would do the same. Hard copies at the clerk's office. You try to make it be one point of contact. It goes to the clerk forwards it to the integrity commissioner. Integrity commissioner then uses this protocol to classify the complaint. And if it's not a code of conduct matter, it has to be rejected. The integrity commissioner would be subject to judicial review if they went outside their jurisdiction and went beyond a code of conduct complaint. They would be outside their jurisdiction if they investigated a matter for which there were no reasonable probable grounds, and they might be subject to judicial review, as would the city, actually. So part of having limits is making sure everybody knows what the role is about, the responsibilities are about, protecting the public, protecting council. And so it's a framework for that purpose. The third piece, the accountability framework bylaw. Toronto has a similar bylaw. And this makes sure that the integrity commissioner that you ultimately appoint will have the confidence of this room, so a 2/3 majority to appoint, but also 2/3 majority to discharge, and not to serve at pleasure, a fixed term. These are all critical pieces of independence. It means, and I would recommend to you that you hire for 1 term only, because what do we all do when we know that we might be up for a new contract? Well, maybe we even subconsciously change our behavior. We're all subject to conflict of personal interest versus public duty. And so these are elements that allow for that independence. The report directly to council. Again, the integrity commissioner does not report to any one individual in government, it's to you as a whole. And it's a relationship between the whole of council and that integrity commissioner. You own the code, you own the power to decide sanctions. The integrity commissioner brings to you, to allow you to fulfill those duties, recommendations, reports, and results of inquiries. And you will see there's a clear description of the role and responsibilities proposed that is similar to what Bill 68 has coming along. And by the way, if there are any changes required as a result of Bill 68, those can be done. Those can be done. But a lot of this, we thought about what's coming and flagged where there might need to be changes. But all in all, it's a robust framework to allow for those conversations to happen, to allow for complaint resolution, and to allow you to be proud of your commitment that you made in 2010 to act in the highest standards. So that's my presentation, and we'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So just before we move into questions, just a couple of ground rules for the discussion. So tonight we're here to talk about the proposed code of conduct. So it's a policy. So it's questions or discussion about the policy that's in front of us. I think that there might be cases where we may want to pose a hypothetical to try to get an understanding of how the policy might be applied. And I think that that's reasonable, but what we are not here to talk about tonight are specific individuals around this table, specific cases or specific investigations. So just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page on that. So with that being said, we'll open it up for questions.
So, Mr. Mayor, we're going to formally move the recommendation in the report. So we'll do that first, and then we'll get into questions.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Turner, that report number 37 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted.
Okay, questions? Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions which in avoidance of ambush questions, I did share with the speakers earlier and with our CAO as well. On two different situations, as I mentioned to you, there was under the Municipal Act in the previous council and currently under the Code of Conduct, it was suggested that perhaps I was in breach. And I spoke to two different lawyers on those two occasions, and both of them spoke to me about the idea of fair comment, and that if I was making a statement that I felt was my opinion and it was an informed opinion.
So
could you comment on the idea of fair comment?
So, Deputy Mayor Neal, I think that the question's fine, but please don't frame it as this is what I was told and this is my situation. Try to just ask the question in general terms.
Fair play.
Thank you.
How does fair comment affect the process of this, of the whole concept of code of conduct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Neal. Fair comment is a concept from defamation law. It's a defense to defamation, that someone is making truthful statements and they're fair, reasonable in the context, and it allows and it fosters the ability to have debate. I don't think that anything that we're suggesting to you would be appropriate for your code of conduct would try to stifle that in any way. As elected representatives, you're here to propagate and to put forward your best views about your constituents. And I think a complaint that alleges that you've done something wrong and your integrity commissioner looking at it and says, I think that was fair comment, would not get you in any harm. The benefit to the framework as we've put forward is that you could go to the integrity commissioner for advice on that specific matter. And you could say, look, this is what's coming forward. This is what I think I'd like to say. I think it's truthful. I think it's appropriate. I think it fosters the debate to a heightened level, not going down in the gutter. It's actually heightening the elevation of the question and the response to the electorate. So I don't see anything problematic with that.
Thank you. And before you sit down, I think this next question may be for you as well. I also shared this concern with you. Sometimes being active in the community, we become aware of information that appears to be public information prior to that information showing up on a report at an in-camera report. This may not be my preferred answer, but if that's the case, is it still considered privileged information, even if members of council were aware of that as publicly shared information prior to the in-camera?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Neal. My view, and I think you know what I'm going to say, Councillor Neal, because I said to you, I've actually looked at the question before, and Janet and I spoke about it just very briefly when you asked us. I feel it's still under the shroud, under the cone of silence of the confidential information. The public won't know where you've gotten the information, and they believe that if you're saying it, it may have been confidential information. So if it's in an in-camera meeting, and that's where you've gotten the information, it's in a report, a correspondence, a document, then I still think it's under that shroud, and you really shouldn't be going and disclosing it. There might be rumors, allegations, or maybe all sorts of things out there. It might be all kinds of things on social media that may speak kind of towards it, but not exactly. And I think it still remains under the cone of silence.
And just a quick question. I noticed for the first time, and it was probably in our earlier code of conduct, and I somehow missed it, the idea that we aren't to participate in any charitable fundraising. And that gave me pause because I know that we do things that are related to United Way, and I've done Heart and Stroke Fund, Arthritis Fund lobbying in the past. Is that, how problematic is that for us to engage in those things that we do as citizens?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Neal, it can be fraught with difficulty to do those sorts of things, and the implication that arises, the perception that's out there, may be that you're doing it for improper purposes and reasons. So again, let me say that the Code of Conduct says you can go to your Integrity Commissioner, and your Integrity Commissioner, you give her all the facts, all the reasonable known facts at the time, and she could say, in this particular instance, I don't see a problem. And that will then serve to absolve you if there's any allegation that comes forward and says, why were you taking part in the United Way? Why were you taking part in the whatever community event fundraising that you've done?
And my last issue, all of us have kind of some broad, because we've been active in the community a lot longer than we've ever been councillors. So I know that there was a perceived potential conflict on my part because I receive a teacher's pension.
So Deputy Mayor Neal, general questions, please, not specific questions for your own advice. That can come one-on-one with the Integrity Commissioner.
I'll talk to you privately about that then. I just was looking for some guidance on things that would seem so obscure or so broad, our involvement in things. So.
Mr. Mayor, if I can ask, if I can answer in a very general sense, it's a question that I often get asked. My wife's a former teacher, and if I was a council member and the teacher's pension plan owns the shopping mall, and the shopping mall needs a rezoning, that kind of thing, right? There's a remote, insignificant exception that's built into the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for matters that are of pecuniary interest. And I think Janet, not putting words in your mouth, but I think you would answer the same way. There is a de minimis test. If it's so minimal and if it's so remote, so possibly insignificant, then I think the Integrity Commissioner would say, there really isn't an issue here. There is no issue. There's nothing that triggers a contravention.
Great. Thank you, and I lied. I said that was my last question. But I noticed in the Bill 68 introduction, the language talks about Code of Conduct for Council, but it also mentions staff as well. And is the Toronto Code of Conduct, does it address both staff and council?
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Lieber can probably speak very directly because she was there, but there is a separate code of conduct for members of council. There's, I believe, a separate code of conduct for members of local boards in the city of Toronto, and I believe staff have their own ethical code. A lot of municipalities do structure it that way. What we were talking about tonight is only the code of conduct for members of council, not staff.
I appreciate that. So I did talk briefly with our CAO before, and if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is indeed a city staff code of conduct also. Is
Say
that
what?
accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I can confirm that the city does have a corporate code of conduct for staff conduct, and that is a document that we provide to each employee when they begin their employment with the city, and we do an update on a regular basis. In fact, that particular code is under review right now in terms of strengthening it, and many of our policies of that nature. Although that one is not posted for public viewing at the moment, because it's under review, it will be posted for public viewing. It's also connected to harassment and discrimination policy, and that will also be updated based on some of the contents and upgrades from Bill 68.
Thank you, I
would
appreciate
I'd
that.
also just like to also point out to members that professionals that are in the employ of the municipality as well by professional designation also have codes with respect to that professional designation, and that serves as well as a professional guide with respect to the conduct within the framework of that professional accreditation.
Thank you. You anticipated both my follow-up questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Candon.
Thank you, and through you. Based on what I've heard, it seems like the two lawyers before us disagree on what the word remote means. So remote chance of a potential conflict of interest. Could you clarify that? Because I feel like the approach or the stance that is being taken with, trying to add myself into this, that could be taken is that one is very broad, the broadest sense possible, which is what I've heard many times, which frightens me as an individual in a small town who's in business. And the other one saying that remote seems something that I would agree with being unlikely, or there's a potential that you could have a pecuniary interest, but it's remote. There is a disagreement, as far as I can see, between your two definitions. Do you see that? Because I see it stick out like a sore thumb.
Sure. We'll find out if we disagree. I'll start by answering that I do agree with John that there will be instances, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Candon, where remote, so remote is like too many steps away from you to actually land at your door as an actual conflict, but also the idea of de minimis, being Latin for small, really small. So it's such a small amount at stake that it really wouldn't rise to the level of being a conflict. Where I expect we probably fit together is that every situation will depend on the facts. So would we agree on the application of a conflict to every set of facts? I'm not sure. Possibly not. Not every person is going to see everything precisely the same way. But from some experience in working with conflict scenarios, and again, it's always about the facts, and you're always getting as many facts as you can, it's only then that you can say, is this remote or is it not? It is partly a question of professional judgment. You're quite right. There may not be complete lining up on all fours by 2 or 3 different integrity commissioners. And that's kind of the way judges work too. But where we are in resounding agreement is that a remote conflict of interest will not be treated the same way as one that is not remote. A de minimis conflict of interest will not be treated the same way as one where there is a significant enough amount of money at stake to give it a different context. I'll let Mr. Mascaron to speak this as well.
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cannon, I don't think we have a significant different point of view on that, and it all really depends on the factual circumstances of the matter. We could have used the word trivial, we could have used remote, we could have used insignificant. I think when I do it, I look at it in a sort of a broad-based scheme, and I go, well, what we're looking at it in a situation where municipal councillors have to do certain things in order to discharge your obligations. And if you're doing that, and the Municipal Act then also requires you to vote on things, and only to not vote if you've been disqualified, well, what has the legislature also said about being disqualified? What's the test for bias? It's a very high threshold test that's the Supreme Court of Canada has put out. So I kind of look at all those things when I'm trying to make an assessment on, in each individual case, is the matter so remote, as Ms. Leeper said, so many steps away, or is it insignificant in its scope and importance to you or to another member of council? Or is it trivial, de minimis? Is the matter kind of trivial in a sense? So I import all those things in making my ultimate determination.
Do you think then if a municipal politician was, say, an accountant at KPMG, that anything related to the potential of an audit of any kind negates that individual from voting in all matters?
I would say no, in the same way that, and I got asked, Councillor Camden, I've got asked the question in a very sort of similar way. I was once dealing with a council member who had an office on Main Street, and he looked after everybody on Main Street. He had all the businesses. They all go to him because he was a council member. Could he possibly deal with a matter, one of those people coming forward? That's problematic because he's actually can have them as potential clients. Now, could the scope be broadened? Could it be much further out than that? Would it be everybody in his ward or everyone in the municipality? And then that's where I put the brakes on. I said, oh, hold on, that's getting a little too far. And I see it as the umbrella has sort of closed a little, and the same confines. So your question is, he works for KPMG, a big accounting firm, Deloitte's, whoever, and can he not deal with anything dealing with accounting or audits or anything like that? So I would say the first thing you should do is you go ask the Integrity Commissioner, do I have an actual problem? This matter here that's coming to council, it's for the municipality, send it an RFP to deal with these services. She might look at it, she might go, well, you know what? KPMG is a firm that would likely bid for this. This might be a bit problematic, right? So that'd be your first point of reference, to go there. And then you expand it to all those other criteria and all those other things that I mentioned.
Okay, when you are looking at a conflict of interest scenario, do you consider the concept that if a councillor declares a conflict of interest, that is a conflict of interest? So if I say, if a councillor says, I'm going to back out of this vote, and that individual backing out of that vote could benefit them personally, do you consider that? And why is that not considered? Well, I can't relate it to myself, but why do you consider all scenarios? So if you were to vote, you could benefit a small amount, but if you don't vote, you could benefit immensely. Do you consider declaring a conflict of interest being a conflict of interest?
That's a really interesting scenario, the way you put it. I actually have, I kid you not, a matter where my client has actually been alleged to have stepped away so the vote would go ahead without her vote and be counted in the negative, because that's how the Municipal Act works. So that's a really interesting situation. Again, I think you'd be protected by going to the Integrity Commissioner and putting the question to the Integrity Commissioner saying, this is what may happen. So you're saying, in fact, if I step away from the table and and from the council chamber and I'm not there when the vote is called, the fact that I'm not there would go to the negative. So I'm actually potentially achieving the very thing that I shouldn't be
Yes,
doing.
if you're in a situation where you vote for it, you're in conflict. If you vote against it, you're in conflict. And if you declare conflict, you're in conflict. What do you do in that situation?
Best thing, you go to the integrity commissioner and get advice on what to do, and then you follow that advice, which will then hold you in good stead if anyone should bring a complaint, and then you'd be immune to any sanction if you follow the advice the integrity commissioner has given you.
I feel what you said is a contradiction to this room.
So that was the answer to the question.
That's fine. It's a contradiction, but I think it's worth
So
noting that
was
that
the
doesn't
answer to
make
the question.
sense.
You can proceed with other questions here.
What do you do in a situation where there is an individual making disparaging comments about you, harassing you, or maliciously injuring your reputation, and the integrity commissioner refuses to take action?
Through you.
So, do you have an answer, Mr. Mascaron? Do you feel comfortable answering that in a general sense?
I'm happy to try to answer it in a general sense. So if I can just ask, Councillor Ken, just to understand, someone is a resident is disparaging a member of council, writing slanderous things about them, putting blogs out that say the most vile, profane things. Can you defend yourself? Is that the question?
Yeah, what do you do if the integrity commissioner refuses to take action in a serious situation?
Well, I'm not sure that something like that would come within the integrity commissioner's purview. The integrity commissioner would look after code of conduct matters. I think you're saying someone out there.
No, if it's another member of council.
Oh, it's another member of council. Well, again, the integrity commissioner may have under Bill 68 the own initiative to be able to go and look at it. I've seen other members of council in other municipalities file complaints against one another, which becomes the Wild West too, and not necessarily a great thing to have. The integrity commissioner would probably want to look at and consider the matter.
I wonder if Mrs. Leeper can answer that question.
So you've asked the question, and you have an answer.
Okay.
Do you have any additional questions at this particular point?
I do, actually. If a councillor goes through a situation where they are found to be in breach, and it is brought up that it is happening quite frequently and has been for the last 20 years, a councillor may be told that no one's complained about those individuals. So what do you do in a situation where one person is found in breach, yet everybody's doing it? What is the response by an integrity commissioner in that particular situation?
So it's a good question, because what it gets at is the culture at council. And what we know from the City of Toronto and from other municipalities is it takes time for a culture to shift. It's a combination of training for everybody on what's in the code. It's a combination of those one-on-one discussions with the integrity commissioner and the advice. And even when there is a finding that there's a breach, that's an opportunity for council to, and for every member to look at themselves and say, oh, you know what, I have to be more careful in future. I'm covered by this. So does it happen like on a dime? Councillor Cannon, it's not. It often takes time. You all work together, and if you were to see, that's why you've got that informal complaint provision. That's there to try to avoid what Mr. Mascaron described as the Wild West, with everybody laying complaints against one another. Again, it's a bit common sense, but usually you would knock on the door of someone and say, you know what, I'm declaring conflicts over here. I sought advice. I'm seeing that you're not. Could you explain to me why you're not? I'm confused. And what message are we sending to the public? Can we go have a coffee? Can we go talk about it? That is kind of out of that informal complaint process. So it's a multi-pronged kind of attack on problems of perhaps conflicts going undeclared. And ultimately, if members of the public see that members are not abiding by their obligations, they may take notice, and there may be more than one kind of repercussion. As we saw at the beginning, you know, that pie of accountability, remember I showed that to you? There's legal, so MCIA, somebody might try to take someone to court. There is political, and that's at the ballot box, and then there's ethical, and that's by way of a complaint.
Is there a situation where other municipalities have a rule where if something is done that is so unethical that there does not need to be a complaint lodged, that something automatically happens?
There is another route, and that is in the complaint protocol, and that's by resolution of this group. If this group decides that something is so egregious, they can refer it to the Integrity Commissioner for an investigation. As you heard, Bill 68 would include of your own motion complaints. That would be the Integrity Commissioner. If everybody was too afraid or it was too fraught and nobody was going to bring anything forward, the Integrity Commissioner could wade in. It's somewhat problematic, but that's my own view, because then there could be complaints that the Integrity Commissioner is now wading into the political milieu. So personally, I prefer complaint-driven or council-driven. And many times council will respond, especially if there's media attention to an issue. So that's another way.
I may let other people ask questions if I'm allowed to ask more.
Sure. So we're in committee of the whole, so we can do multiple rounds of questions. So
I'll let
that's
other
fine.
people go.
So next on my list is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I also have sent 14 questions ahead of time, and feel free to stop me if you want me to go to the second round. And I also have two quick new ones based on the presentation. So just to double check, it sounds like the Integrity Commissioner reports to Council. So that's like saying that Council now has two employees, the CAO and the Integrity Commissioner. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor McLaren. Yeah, the Integrity Commissioner is given an independent authority and reports directly to Council. I've often said that's without any political interference from anybody, from staff or anyone else. So in my municipalities, go directly to Council. In fact, I brought up a matter with Janet today where the agenda was being set and I had written reports. I expected the reports to be on the agenda. The reports were not on the agenda. I didn't like that because it's interfering with my independence in reporting to Council. So I don't know that I would actually say that Council only has two employees, but I would say the Integrity Commissioner reports directly to Council and nobody else.
Okay. And it was mentioned that all requests have to be in writing. Does that include email and text? Just to double check.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in writing would be probably, everything's facilitated through emails and however. I know some municipalities have certain forms. They want to know the council member, the date, some other very, very specific information, and then whatever. I often just take requests through an email, and I find that a lot of my council members will often give me a lot of details, attachments, all kinds of things. So email, I think, would be fine. It all depends on how you'd want to set up the system.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next question has to do with a lot of these terms that are here, and I know that a lot of people have different interpretations of the same word, and just Googling most of these words, a lot of dictionaries have different definitions of things like high and standard and conduct and good governance, conscientious, diligent, integrity, accountability, and transparency. And I've noticed that they're not actually defined here, even in a broader general sense. Might this be a little stronger if we had a little bit more guidance as to what these words mean or don't mean, perhaps?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We've considered this. As we said, the Code of Conduct is not an encyclopedic work. You're not going to have every single term defined. It's not meant to be like that. We think that it works well if you interpret it within its proper context. The rule to deal with statutory interpretation, which the courts have said, there are two aspects to it. One is text, the other is context. You have to interpret them together. It's not necessarily always the most beneficial thing to do just to go to a dictionary, because you're right, they could have different determinations, and as Ms. Leeper said, different people may have different interpretations. We looked at it, there are certain defined terms in there, but there are not a whole bunch of defined terms because we think that the general understanding of them is understandable.
Okay. And in the last bullet of section 2.2, it speaks of upholding the letter of the law. And you had mentioned earlier that this would be a good place to put an amendment. May I suggest one? As in, move that the...
So that's
Is that
So
later?
we're
or-
just in questions right now.
Okay.
So you can ask the question if you want, what the opinion is on that, but we're going to wait until questions are over before we would then put it on the floor. And
Fair enough. So just to clarify, I did hear you correct that you'd think it would be a decent amendment to add the words "and spirit" after the word "law" or "letter" on the second bullet?
I do. I think that would be a good amendment.
Wonderful, thank you. Question 3. Section 4.2 speaks of a fiduciary responsibility between council and residents. Now, fiduciary, again, in the sense of involving trust. We all have that all the time with everybody. How is it different for councillors, which it's not quite clear in there? If there's something that we could add or explanation of what you mean by we do have a fiduciary responsibility. Like, in a sense, we have that with anybody. We don't hit people on the street. We don't drive our car on the left side of the road, that kind of stuff. So how is that different for our code of conduct that it has to be in there?
Mr. Mayor, through you, to me, fiduciary has a very specific meaning. Someone who is a trustee of the public interest, the public good. The court cases have talked about it, and I appreciate what you're saying. You're saying, well, we may not have read the same things that you have read. The public may not know. But again, we thought that fiduciary had a very specific connotation, meaning, and application as it's set out in the, which is really a trustee to do and act in the public interest, and not to do a whole bunch of things that would be like a breach of trust, municipal corruption, all those things. There was a very recent case from the city of Toronto on fiduciary and reiterated the whole notion that a fiduciary as an elected representative means someone who has the public interest at heart and will not act against it. A breach of fiduciary duty must include malice, must include some sort of conflict or some misfeasance on the part of the council members. I submit to you, I was already surprised when I saw the Court of Appeal of Ontario say you need those three, or at least one of those three, because I thought that was a very high standard. So I don't think people are going to find you in breach of fiduciary duty that easily, and I hope that helps. But I always thought of it as a relationship of trust to uphold the public interest.
Hope you're right. Okay. Next question. Section 5.1a, it talks about acting with good faith and care, but it doesn't actually talk about good faith with what. It might be conceivable that some might feel that there's a good faith attempt to protect the public from the truth, and that would seem to be contrary to the principles. Might it be better to actually clarify that a little bit?
Ultimately, it's your code, and if you decide that it's not clear enough, you can come up with alternate wording. But again, it's part of a larger document. It's meant to be read together and not in isolation. So if you pick something out and look at it, put it up on the screen by itself, you might say, oh, that could be twisted somehow. However, it will take its meaning from all the other bullets so that good faith will take on that context. We were comfortable with it for that reason.
Fair enough, okay. And section 5.1, are we still able to interrupt a speaker for a point of privilege or a point of order in light of the fact that courtesy is usually you don't interrupt people?
Mr. Just before you respond, I appreciate the efforts of both of you to get up and down for every question, but you're actually welcome just to stay sitting if that's easier and just use the microphones there. You just have to touch the button there.
We were trying to be respectful, that's why.
No, we totally appreciate that, but I think
Sure, we'll sit down for the rest.
All right. So the question, through you, Mr. Mayor, concerned the procedural bylaw, what happens in this chamber rising on points of privilege. Does that somehow get cut back by the requirement of courtesy? No, and in fact, the procedural bylaw is kind of, it's going to be your rules while in here, and integrity commissioners don't tend to take complaints for things that happen in this room. That would undercut the authority of the mayor, who's in the chair. It's the mayor's job to impose and enforce those rules while you're in active debate. So it's not a conflict.
Okay, sorry, that just raises another question. So the Integrity Commissioner does not deal with anything that happens in council chambers. Did I get that? Did I hear that right?
Almost.
Okay.
Almost. If it is a matter that is while council is in session and an application of the procedural bylaw and the chair's prerogative, to example, to require somebody to leave or to deal with the matter, historically, traditionally, integrity commissioners leave that to the chair. Now, that doesn't mean that things that happen while the chair is not in session or while somebody's over there or somebody goes and insults someone. We have seen those examples in other municipalities where code of conduct jurisdiction was accepted. So do you sort of take the distinction?
Yes, I think so, and actually that solves about two of the other questions. Section 6.3C, which speaks of not inviting staff to engage in partisan political activities, it sounds like can we go to the door during a campaign and ask them to vote for us if we happen to find a staff member?
We talked about this question. I think the other part of the question, if I can just put it all together, was could you ask staff to volunteer for you, to put a sign on their lawn? And we both found ourselves in agreement that the line would be asking staff to do something active on your campaign, but that of course you're able to canvass door to door. That's you out there as a candidate. That it would be, and again, you come back to your integrity commissioner if you had a question to make sure you were covered by this advice. But if you were to ask me, I would say, of course you can campaign. Now, you'd want to be sensitive to the staff person involved. So again, facts will rule. So let's assume that you could add a couple of facts about your relationship with that staff member that you might know they'd be uncomfortable even having you come and stand on their porch for whatever reason, for something you were working on together, or for some reason that they could not easily disentangle their private life from their public staff council relationship, in which case, if you knew it was their house, you might give it a pass. Again, there's a sensitivity, there's a fact base, but generally you would be out there campaigning, you're wearing your hat as candidate. You just want to be really careful to keep that boundary clear between councillor and candidate.
Okay, thank you. Section 11.2 makes it sound like we cannot write reference letters for someone and include our title. Is that correct?
Now, this is a good question because, you know, the City of Toronto dealt with this. And again, this is part of the culture. I'm sure all of you as councillors get asked, or maybe you have gotten asked for years, would you please write me a reference letter? Would you please support this funding application? The City of Toronto brought itself down on the line this way. It actually created a policy on reference letters where if you were a sitting councillor, you could write a reference letter if you had had a relevant employment or student-teacher relationship. So in other words, there's a reason for you to write the reference letter. But if it's just a constituent or somebody who has supported your campaign, it would be an improper use of the influence of your office and your title to write that reference letter. So do you need a policy? Not necessarily. You've got an improper use of influence clause, but it causes you to ask the right question. You're asking the right question. Is it part of my job description as councillor to help people get jobs? And what kind of quid pro quo relationship might that set up? So relevant relationship, it's probably going to be fine. You might do it on your personal letterhead so that nobody later, say the person who didn't get the job found out that you'd written that letter, well, that might then in turn spark a complaint that that's not the job of a councillor to go get jobs for that person over there. Why do you need the headache? You know, so that's kind of the thinking that would go into that.
Great, thank you. And last one, section 14.1 makes it sound like we cannot give any information over the city phones related to election campaigns or anything like that. And I know that conversations tend to shift over a lot of things, and sometimes you can have a legitimate conversation that drifts over to something else. And at that point, it becomes almost counter to courtesy. Say, no, I can't talk about this anymore, or call me at my other number. We'll talk about that later, or something like that. It almost seems a little bit counter to the courtesy one. Is there, how serious is this, and would it be better if we were just to use a personal phone instead of ever accepting a city phone?
Again, it's all about that boundary, and as you start to think about the practicalities, you're coming down to things that other councillors have wrestled with, and in fact, many have done exactly that. They have separate social media presences, separate accounts, separate phones, because you don't want the person to come away from it misunderstanding candidate and councillor together. Now, does it mean you can't refer somebody to your website if they happen to call you on your phone? There's some practicalities, and again, this is a huge area of advice in other municipalities because the facts differ from person to person. Everybody, and we spent hours at the City of Toronto talking about the social media policy during elections because, as it turns out, some of the social media vehicles don't like to have you to have two separate personas. Some municipalities, for example, the City of Seattle, pays for links to everybody's councillor social media. So it's very clear that's where they do their work as councillors, that's how people access them. But the expectations are you do not use any of that media for campaigning to create that divide.
Okay, so those are the basic ones on that. Now, these other 4 questions deal with the connection between our oath of office and this conduct, this code of conduct. So it's a little bit removed, but it is connected. If, with your leave, Your Worship, may I ask a few more questions?
Why don't we do a second round?
Certainly.
Just to give some other people a chance to ask questions. Actually, I'm next on the list, so I'll just take the opportunity to ask you a few questions. So you mentioned earlier that the Code of Conduct is a general statement on general principles. And you also mentioned that it's important that you have one person in place to enforce that because, I think by implication, different people can interpret those principles differently. So I guess that's part of the challenge that I think we're grappling with tonight, is that we're trying to approve a policy, general statement. We don't really know how it will be applied until after we hire the particular integrity commissioner. I'm just wondering if you can speak to that concern. How do we, to your point about consistency, how do we ensure consistency if, for example, the integrity commissioner changes from person to person and that would change the interpretation and application of that principle?
Mr. Mayor, that's, I think, an issue that's, has been around as, some time immemorial, that different people will interpret things in different ways, okay? I think our comment on and with respect to the ethical framework and to get an integrity commissioner, you won't know how they're going to rule. You won't necessarily know how they're going to apply things in the specific, but what you want to get, and I really do urge you, and I think Janet would agree with me, you need to get someone who knows something about this area, who knows something about administrative law, because they're going to be conducting investigations, enforcement. They need to know something about ethical regimes, codes of conduct, and they need to know something about how you operate, because you operate as local representatives very differently from your brothers and sisters at the legislature and in Parliament. In one way, it's your politicians, but in another way, you operate under a very different scope. You have to do everything in an open public setting, in an open public forum, the open meeting rule under 239. It's very different from how the federal and provincial governments work. So I think what I was urging is that you get someone who is very familiar with those 3 branches. And I know sometimes it's very tempting to go, well, that person seems to know a lot about municipal law, but if they don't really know anything about ethical regimes or they know planning law, it's not really going to help you. Or someone who's maybe an employment law lawyer who's all they've done is harassment and human rights complaints. They might not know how you operate. They might not know the rules dealing with municipalities. For instance, I just mentioned the open meeting rule, the indoor management rule, the self-help remedy, all things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis that someone else doesn't, and they need to know how those things operate. So that's what I was getting to.
Thank you. So does the Integrity Commissioner need to be from a different community? So you made the comment earlier that you're an Integrity Commissioner for certain municipalities that are far from where you are. So is there a general rule or practice the Integrity Commissioner should be a couple of steps removed from your community, or is it better that they actually have some knowledge of the community?
And Mr. Mayor, Ms. Leeper may want to chime in too, because we had this discussion, and I had this discussion just the other evening with another municipality that I'm doing pretty much the same thing, helping them to bring forward their ethical regime. I said, in every municipality that I'm an Integrity Commissioner, none of them are close to where I live. None of them are close to where my office is, and I did that on purpose because I didn't want to run into issues with my firm possibly doing business. But that's my rule, and I figure if I'm going to be an Integrity Commissioner, I should at least follow some rules of integrity and ethics. It's always a great question, though. Do you want someone who knows what's going on here, who may have had some great awareness of who's fighting with whom, what are the embroglios that people are involved in? Or do you want someone with an absolutely clean slate who doesn't know the first thing about it and comes in and looks at it and says, well, here is the code of conduct that the council has passed, and it says these things. It has these general principles, and it has these rules. And I'm going to apply this factual situation to that without any knowledge, without any bias, prejudgment. I don't think there's a rule either way, which one is better or the other. And I appreciate that one of the things that you might say is, boy, if we were to hire someone from Windsor and they have to come and do an investigation up here, wow, that's a lot of time and a lot of traveling. Maybe we don't want that. And I understand that perfectly. And it's something that I've grappled with in doing work for other municipalities. These days, you can do a lot of things through the internet, through Skyping. I do a lot of telephone interviews or questioning. I do it that way. Sometimes you just have to be face-to-face. I get that. But there are ways to get around that. And I don't know. So I think it's better to have a clean slate. But I'll tell you, I was recently asked this question where I was investigating someone who, I'll say it, it's been a repeat offender. I did not know anything about the member before I looked at them, and so I judged them, the complaints that came before me, on a standalone basis. The complainant said you should have had recourse to the past history. You might have looked at it a little differently. I said, that's actually not, I can't disagree with you. I chose, though, to do it this way. I didn't want to prejudge or bias myself in any way. But that's a judgment call.
I think the point to be made is there are different issues and pros and cons with somebody local and somebody from away. There's at least one Integrity Commissioner in Canada who was appointed, and the press noted the fact that that Integrity Commissioner had actually made a donation to the campaign of one of the members and therefore was conflicted out of any complaint involving that member. Therefore, they then had to hire somebody else if anything comes up. So that's a possible conflict from a local person, but it doesn't mean a local person can't do it. It just means you have to mitigate whatever the issues are.
Thank you. So in certain context, it appears that the Integrity Commissioner plays an investigative role. And in other circumstances, it appears that the Integrity Commissioner is more there for advice. So I guess the question is, when is the Integrity Commissioner your advocate, and when is the Integrity Commissioner your judge? And can those switch back and forth? Because if you're not clear and you think that the Integrity Commissioner is your advocate and you share and you disclose, could that information be used against you in an investigation later on? So I'm just wondering if there's some clarity you can bring on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. The Integrity Commissioner is actually really never your advocate, but is definitely your guide. And the advice function is done in a confidential way. So I'm only aware of one instance where that advice later came back in the context of a formal complaint, and it was only where the counselor refused to follow the advice. It then became an informal complaint. Again, they refused to follow the advice. They did it 3 or 4 times. Finally, someone complained formally, and that was basically an escalation. If they had followed the advice, then it would have been a matter of likely a refusal to participate any further, because in that case, the guide role would have served the counselor. It's when the counselor says, no, I'm breaking with you on this. I'll make up my own mind. Thanks for the advice, but I'm just going to go ahead. Now, as a role, though, I'm sort of an 80-20 fan here, which is probably 80% of your contacts with your members should be advisory and educational, because otherwise, if it's 80-20 the other way, you can't help it. You'll be seen as a cop. You will not be seen as the advisor, as the guide, as the person with the judgment and the experience and all the rest of it. And so I don't think that makes for a great actual relationship, but it's driven by both sides of the relationship. So if everyone's kind of committed to what they call a level 3 organization, which is an organization committed to the letter and the spirit of the code and seeks out advice in advance, everybody's served, and you're very rarely going to have those formal complaints.
Okay. Thank you. There was a point made earlier in your presentation about the importance of having everything in writing. And I think that many times when a member of council is looking for advice, or at least to try to explore whether there might be a potential issue, they may want to have the ability to have a more informal conversation first. I just want to clarify, is that still possible? So is the writing requirement only once you're heading for a vote and you want to make sure that you're covered, or is it that every time that we want advice, everything has to be in writing from the outset?
I think what's contemplated is that you could have any kind of communication, but if you want to have the protection of it, it should be reduced to writing. But certainly having those conversations is really valuable, the informal. And what we used to do when we reported to the City of Toronto was we'd break out informal requests for advice and formal. Informal being on the phone, on the fly, at council, but then formal was when we reduced it to writing. And it's when you want to be able to rely on it. And believe me, every integrity commissioner writes everything down. They're told anyway. Even the on-the-fly ones. We go away, we make the note, we track it, because we're responsible to reporting to you annually about what's the work of the office.
Thank you. Okay, I'll stop for that round. Next on my list is Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you. I have had one of my questions answered. I have a couple more. I'm just curious, at this point, are we just directing questions to the briefing, or can we have questions of staff as well?
I think it's appropriate to ask questions of staff if it's something that is related to the input, that something is not covered by the code of conduct. So I'm just wondering, why don't you ask the question and then we can...
Sure, yeah, okay, cool. So the first question is, so what about a situation in which it is the councillor or the member's perspective that they are acting in the best interests of their constituents, and there's a perceived conflict? Have you had any experience along those lines, or I could come up with a hypothetical if you like?
I think most of the time people believe they're acting in the best interests, that very few people set out to act improperly. What we know from psychological, social science research is that when we have a conflict, it's very hard for us to see it. That's why having the objective third party with experience helps you. And in fact, you kind of take good faith out of the equation, and it's just, what are the facts? What does it look like? It's what people a little farther away who don't know you would assume, and so it doesn't require you to assert your good faith or to say I'm doing this for a good reason. That's just accepted as a given, pretty much. It's almost more of a mechanical exercise. It's an institutional requirement versus a personal one. It's not like a personal ethic.
Okay, thanks. I guess just like to further clarify there, then what I'm sort of getting at is that when the role of counselor involves other obligations, involves obligations outside of this chamber, so example, participating in external boards, and having an obligation to the board and to that governing body, and also to this body. So in those circumstances, are there situations in which, so I guess, I mean, I'm guessing that the advice would be speak to the Integrity Commissioner and sort of figure that out, but are there ways of mitigating those situations that you can speak to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Holland. I think you're asking a question, as part of your role as a council member, you've been appointed to another board, committee, tribunal, or something, and that's a specific exemption. We actually looked it up just before. Under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, it allows, if council has appointed you to be on another board, then there's no issue of a pecuniary interest arising. So you wouldn't run afoul, and your primary duty and obligation would be to that particular board when you're sitting on that board. So let's say you're the representative of council to the Conservation Board. Council may have a certain mindset and a determination to do certain things, but you have to exercise your obligations in the best of your abilities to the board, to the Conservation Authority at the time that you're sitting on the board. And for instance, if you've received confidential information from that, you cannot come back and speak to council about it. Council may have a very real interest, but you have an obligation to that board first and foremost. Then you sit as council member, and then you can vote as a council member to whatever you want, which may not be in the interest of the board, of the interest of the Conservation Authority. Does that help?
It does. I guess in that case, then there's no need to declare any sort of conflict. You just proceed with the understanding that you're wearing both hats, but acting first in your role as a member of the board, and then secondly in your capacity as councillor. Is that what I'm getting?
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
You're specifically exempted. So Section 4H, I think, of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act says you may have a pecuniary interest, you may have a deemed pecuniary interest, but you don't have to comply with the requirements under Section 5 to declare and then not participate, not vote, and not attempt to influence the voting.
Okay, thanks. And so then the other two are for staff, and I'll just ask them at the same time in case there's something for further discussion. I guess in regards to another member has brought up the fact that what we're looking at here is our code of conduct for how we behave. Are there any protections in regards to harassment, discrimination that exist for members of council? And if so, how do they function is the first question. And the second one is just a very, very minor issue, I guess, in regards to Councillor McLaren's discussion of our resources, our phones. Are there any, it just seems so kind of wasteful nowadays when you have technology that does so many things to have this arbitrary rule that this number is for this purpose and then everything else has to be done elsewhere. I'm just putting that out there because, you know, these phones are capable of so much. Why do we need to have two of them?
So I think that the first question is definitely appropriate for staff, and maybe the integrity commissioners would want to comment on the second one. Is there somebody somebody from staff that would like to comment on the first part? So the first question was respect to is there protections about from harassment of members of council? Ms. Nicholson?
Through your worship, I'm just thinking about that. I mean, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, for instance, is one provision which principally applies in the workplace. In general, though, there is the Human Rights Code. And the Human Rights Code would provide any individual with protection from sexual harassment or harassment as defined in the Human Rights Code or discrimination as defined in the Human Rights Code. So I think those provisions apply to every citizen in the province. And so I think there are certain rights under that legislation that you would have if you felt you were in a discrimination or harassment situation.
So, but the employer's role in all of that then, like, would that be a counselor going as a sort of a free agent or a self-employed person, or would they be going with the protection of the organization, the corporation, the city of Kingston, in seeking any kind of formal reconciliation for an issue like that?
Through your worship, a counselor, a member of council isn't an employee. And so the protections that would apply as an employee wouldn't be applicable. So I think that that would probably be something that we would have to look at the situation. And again, it would be one of those fact-specific things. I do know for sure that the Human Rights Code, for instance, if it's sexual harassment, it would apply. And I think we'd have to look at the circumstances at the time to see what kind of measures could be put in place. But I think there would be, in general, there's obligations to do something. But it wouldn't be as an employer.
Yes, Mr. Muscare.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, through you, and Ms. Nicholson is correct, there is a recent case on that very point of a council member seeking to sue or bring a complaint against her own municipality. It's Demucho and town of Newmarket. It's a recent decision that came out last summer, and I'd be pleased to send it to Ms. Nicholson. She may want to make it available to you. It says exactly what Ms. Nicholson just said, which is a council member is not an employee, nor is it an employment relationship with the municipality, but there are other safeguards. So I'd be happy to send that.
Sayo Hunt.
So I'd just like to add to that, the harassment and discrimination policy that the city has also relates to workplace. So if the harassment happens inside the workplace and you're a party to that, there are rules that would enable us to diffuse the situation such that it could include removing people from the workplace, asking them to leave, and doing those sorts of things. So I would say in that context, the workplace, if that was the place that it was occurring, there would be ability to help and deal with it. The challenge, of course, is that often these things are not in the workplace, and that becomes, respect as well. I also wanted to, perhaps at this point in time, also talk a little bit about the role of staff as it relates to the code of conduct. And I want to say at first that it is very difficult for staff to try to give any kind of advice to a council member, whether we want to or not, when it comes to interpretation of your particular circumstance as it relates to the code of conduct for council conduct. And we try to be perhaps sympathetic to comments or information that you're trying to give us to help you make a decision, but the reality is that we do not have a role in that. We do not need to know your personal circumstances. We do not have a role to be able to offer advice in the absence of full fact. And in fact, it almost puts staff in a bit of a conflict in that if we know some of that information, then what do we actually do with that? So I say that because I know sometimes you have looked to us for help, and we have tried to point you back to the Integrity Commissioner. I think we are all learning as well. But the reality is that the Integrity Commissioner, once that position is established and your code is established, is the place that you actually get that particular advice. And I would go one step further, and I would invite Ms. Leeper and Mr. Muscarin to comment on this, but it is not the same as the code that would be required if we were trying to deal with an employee that was in violation of the code of conduct in the workplace. That is our responsibility, and that's what we would deal with in accordance with the circumstances there. But as it has been pointed out, the code of conduct of council is not in the purview of the corporation itself.
I think you've hit on exactly the right point, which is it's very important to understand the roles and responsibilities, and it's what protects everybody to make it clear. And that's why an Integrity Commissioner reports directly to council and not up through the CAO. If you look at your org chart when you redo it, you would see that, and it reflects the reality on the ground. And so for that reason, the role of staff is merely to maybe identify, oh, this is a code of conduct matter. There's who you talk to. Please don't tell me more about it because I'm not governed by secrecy in the Municipal Act, but that person is, and that person's advice protects you. So I do agree with what was just said.
And then there was a second question that you had on the technology piece.
Yeah, I guess I'm just because so it's mostly about the fact that I think various employers, while I understand I'm not an employee of the city, maybe it's different, but recognize that now everyone uses a cell phone, they use it for their personal use, and so there are policies in place that say, okay, you can use this phone for your personal use, you can contribute towards the bill, and that kind of offsets any potential conflict between using it for your work and using it at home. So it was more an operations question really about whether or not that would be something, well, I guess it goes to the Integrity Commissioner as well, just in trying to understand if there is the potential to move in that direction, just kind of understanding the logistical challenges of having technology like this.
And that is the role, Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor, of advice to figure out what are practical, workable solutions that fit within the spirit of that code of conduct. So I don't know how your phones here work. Are they provided by the city? Do they provide all the maintenance? Is all the information backed up on their servers? Is it, in other words, a city phone that you give back at the end? Or is it something else? Is it something where you get some expense money to buy a phone that's your phone? So those kinds of questions would be what you'd get into, not necessarily to do here and now, but you're asking good questions, and you're already starting to solve ethical problems in the real world, which is really what it's all about.
Councillor Bohm.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Just hypothetically, would it be fair to say that sometimes integrity commissioners would disagree or have a difference of opinion? Would that be a fair statement? I think you can see what I'm doing. You're both lawyers, so I'm going to give you a sort of a...
Absolutely. I think like any two reasonable people can have reasonable points of view and reach opposite conclusions. Yes, we can disagree.
Okay. I wanted to be a lawyer too, but I'm not. Anyways, so my next step, I guess, would be, if that's reasonable, then is it reasonable to assume that there could be a situation where there could be a vote that was so close, so 7-6, that if you were to take a person who may have an apparent conflict and go to one integrity commissioner with that apparent conflict, that person could be deemed not allowed to vote. But if that person's apparent conflict was to go to a different integrity commissioner, that person would be told they could vote. So you could hypothetically have a situation where a difference of opinion could basically be the deciding vote on potentially a $250 million project in a municipality. So how does one reconcile a policy like this with something like that, where you could end up actually going against the will of the people simply because of a difference of opinion? So again, just to sort of sum that all up, we've established at the outset that integrity commissioners can have a difference of opinion. We've also established that there are votes which will be so close that that ruling can basically decide which way that vote goes. So in that instance, this policy almost muddies the waters of all municipal politics in that sense, because if no two people, especially integrity commissioners,
So
sorry.
question, not comment.
Okay, sorry. So if that's the case, then essentially, and this code of conduct is to clarify these things to the average public, and yet integrity commissioners can even have differences of opinion. How do we deal with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think, Councillor Bowen, you're going to always have differences of opinion. I may get a complaint and may deal with it in a certain way, and another integrity commissioner could get like the same complaint and deal with it in a different way. I don't know what to say to you on that. I know the Supreme Court of Canada has 9 judges. My partner was recently involved in a case where it went 5-4. In his side. It could have easily have flipped, and you would have gone to the side and you would have said a matter of fundamental importance went all the way to Supreme Court of Canada. One vote would have just changed it. I don't know how else to...
But maybe I can add something else, because the close cases are the ones that really catch attention. But it's different than a ruling. You see, what the Integrity Commissioner does is give advice. So if a person comes ahead of time and it's a close vote situation, and the Integrity Commissioner says, look, I'm going to give you my best advice based on all the facts you tell me and my experience. But an Integrity Commissioner doesn't tell you you can't vote. The Integrity Commissioner says, I advise you not to, and here are the risks if you do. We come back to the point that you own the code of conduct. It's your decision ultimately what to do with the benefit of the advice, knowing what the risks might be. And so if it's a close call and you say, you know what, this just matters way too much for me, I hear what you're saying, Integrity Commissioner, I'm going to take the risk. Now, some people have taken that risk and ended up spending $100,000 defending themselves in court on a Municipal Conflict of Interest Act application that they lost their seat over or could lose their seat over. That's the risk. The other risk is it's not a pecuniary interest. Somebody or 10 people come forward with a complaint that say, especially on a close one, because those are the ones the public watch, that says you breached the code of conduct, complaint, investigate. And then your Integrity Commissioner makes the ruling. But as John said, there are cases where it might be almost what we call like a law school moot court question, where people can line up on either sides of it. That's why we have a process, because we're not going to have 100% people agreeing on 100% of the time, but from what I see of my colleagues, and there are a number of them now, we tend to agree on a fairly sizable proportion. It's not like people are all over the map on this stuff, and there's a significant amount of case law to help us guide our ruling. So I think nobody can give you an absolute certainty, but that's how it operates.
So with that in mind, then, I mean, essentially a difference of opinion could occur between any 2 integrity commissioners. Obviously, you mentioned that the Supreme Court of Canada has 9 judges and it comes to 5-4. So is there anything coming up in the Bill 68 to look at maybe having a tribunal? Because again, you're coming down to one person's opinion, which could be it's sunny today and then tomorrow it's not. And then, so I mean, these are massive decisions that we're making on behalf of our constituents and trying to do this following this code. But it seems like even with that answer, it's still kind of blurry and we're supposed to follow this, but again, it's not clear. So if it's not clear to us, I guess it's probably not going to be clear to most people when and how this would work. So I guess I'll move on to another question. When integrity commissioners look at rulings or any issues, do they follow the media at all, or do they try to read the articles that are in the media about that issue, or is it simply the facts that they can get from the parties involved?
If I can answer this, and then you may, because you were in the media spotlight, Janet. So, Mr. Mayor, through you, I actually don't go and look at too much else. Every once in a while you need some context, yes. I look at it, and in the municipalities of which I'm an integrity commissioner, and I've had some input into some of the documents, I often say, like, complainants should come forward with their full case. because I've been asked a lot, well, why didn't you come and ask me? And I say, well, because the evidence that you put forward, the documents that you gave me, just didn't seem to substantiate anything. I took that as, why are you withholding stuff? You should have come forward. I actually don't go read the newspapers. But that's not like a general rule. It's just how I go about it. Again, they're not in areas where I'm living, so I'm not reading the local paper generally. I don't think that that's necessarily a wrong thing, but you read one media thing and someone says, well, you can't read that. They're biased against this council member. You should read this. And so I try to limit what I'm looking at to those particular facts and anything else that I think is important to find from. But I don't generally go to blogs or the local media. I don't.
I have had a number of complaints where I receive copies of media that form part of the background, so I read those. I also sometimes look for general background, and when I report on a matter, I have a list of the investigative steps taken so that council can see in the report what's been done, and if there's a media search, I did a media search. Trying to have, because it's an investigation, and because sometimes there's material out there that leads you to something else. And a number of the complaints that I've done in other places were by the media or sparked by the media. And sometimes members of council have made statements to the media that I then, in turn, when I interview them, ask them about. So I sometimes do use it if it feels as if it would serve the investigation.
I guess that just sort of cycles back to an earlier comment about whether it was better to have somebody completely unbiased removed or somebody that is kind of living in the local area, because if you're going to go to that level with this, again,
Question.
Question, please. So my next question would be, I guess with this policy is how, in applying this policy, we could theoretically have many votes where you could have far fewer than 6 or 7 councillors step out, especially recently bylaw votes we can think. And so how does this policy sort of look and apply when we're going to potentially end up tightening the reins on this in a sense, but getting down to the point where we've got 2 or 3 people in here voting on issues, and sort of, I guess, how does it deal with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the only way I can answer is that that's never happened in a municipality that I've been involved in, where there's been a widespread issue that a majority of the council members have all of a sudden had to recuse themselves because of a code of conduct conflict or something else. So I've never had that. I suppose it possibly could happen, and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act recognizes that it can go down to only 2 members to make a decision if that many members declare a pecuniary interest. I don't think that happens very often, so I don't know how to answer it but to say that, yeah, it might mean that some people shouldn't be voting on things because they've asked for the advice, and the advice has been, don't think you should vote on this matter. I think it's problematic for you. Or don't take other steps, don't attempt to influence staff, all those things. And so then the reins tighten on who's making the decision.
Okay. All right, just one more quick question then. So essentially, when this policy is adopted, how does it cover things that have occurred prior to the adoption of the new policy? Would they be covered under the old code of conduct, or is this now a blanket thing that covers everything? I guess it just because usually there's some type of grandfather clause if an event occurred before the adoption of a new policy.
I should probably answer that, since I'll be the one, at least on an interim basis, assisting you until a new commissioner comes in. Generally, in law, the substance, so that's the code of conduct, starts from the day you pass it forward. So the old one would cover anything that happened then, the new one then. And we haven't put in a transition provision making it retroactive. So that's how I would interpret it. On procedure, it starts from the day you put it in place. So the complaint protocol, even if it dealt with an older problem, it usually makes sense. It's your intention to have that procedure, because it's about procedure, not about the actual substance. So I would apply that one as of, and prospectively, the code of conduct. And maybe John has a view, and that's something also the city solicitor sometimes has a view on.
Yeah, no, I agree with those comments. The law says that a code or a policy or a law can apply retroactively. You can put it backwards in time if you wanted to, but we haven't built any of that, and we were going to, I think, have it apply just like Janet indicated.
Okay, and would a recorded conversation be the same as written proof? Or, sorry, written, or is it, like, I guess if you're in a conversation with somebody and you record it with their knowledge, would that count the same as having a written statement, or is that not really valid?
My understanding is that Bill 68 says in writing.
Okay.
So that to me, that doesn't mean a recording.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Turner.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question about the parent conflict of interest. Could you tidy that up a bit for me? It seemed very vague.
Yeah, I had that on the slide. An apparent conflict of interest reflects the fact that conflicts can arise in the eyes of the beholder and not from the point of view of the owner of the conflict. So my conflict of interest could arise from relationships that I have that somebody sees from afar, and it may require certain action. Or the person, sorry, I want to be able to see you, or the person could misapprehend the facts and believe there's an apparent conflict of interest, but when it's brought to the council says, oh no, that's not my brother-in-law, that's someone with the same name who I've never met. So now the apparent conflict of interest has disappeared. So it's really describing a situation where somebody perceives there to be a conflict or a tension between a private relationship, a private interest, financial or otherwise, or a role that then has to be addressed responsibly. And so it could influence how that person votes or debates or deals with a matter with it taking into account just their public interest.
It's just tricky because it's kind of gray, and it'd be easier if we had some more rules assigned to it or a little more structure in it.
I think the difficulty with conflict of interest is that it can arise in so many ways, and there's really no other way to describe it other than with those two big principles. Is there something in your private life unconnected to your role of counselor? Is it a family member? Is it a business? Is it an ownership? Is it a strongly held belief that's not related to the role of counselor that is interfering with your ability to objectively, in the public interest, do your work? And so to define it any more than that is really begging for examples. But as soon as you go down that rabbit hole, you're into the world of conflict. So we've given you some by way of example, but we can't give you all. And it will be bounded by, well, maybe that's really remote. It's bounded by some of the things in the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. You're allowed to vote on your own remuneration. That sounds like a pecuniary conflict, doesn't it? But you can, because by policy, how else would you set it? If it's so remote or it's an interest in common, you know, the hydro rates you pay, everybody pays hydro in the city of Kingston. Someone's got to make those decisions. Nobody would not have a conflict if you said, but we're all affected by that. We all pay hydro, for example. So those are some of the protections. We can talk about the protections. We can talk about the principle. We can provide examples. But I don't think we can do much better than that. Maybe John can. I'll pass it to him.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Turner, I'm not sure that I can. The difficulty, if you look at the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, for a little piece of legislation that's only, I think, 16 sections, there's hundreds of cases, and they go all over the place, and seemingly sometimes very contradictory. But if you really look carefully, they're actually not contradictory. They're very fact-specific and very fact-driven. So I often get people who say to me, can you just tell me, I want to have this covered off for forever and a day. And I go, I can't do that. The facts may change, the actual matter in front of council may change. So for instance, you may have a matter that's coming before council to deal with road improvements to some area. And you may say, yes, clearly it's not near me at all, I'm okay, it's not going to have any impact on me. And all of a sudden there's a motion at council to extend the road. All of a sudden, it may impact you. So everything is very fact-driven, very fact-specific, and it's very hard to give any more certainty than that.
So we could be in your office a lot then, unfortunately. I have another quick question, and not to be cheeky or anything, but is there a commissioner's OMB commission if we don't like the ruling?
There is. It's called the Divisional Court. You can judicially review decisions made by integrity commissioners because they're exercising, it's an administrative law function. Has it happened? Not too often. There's a recent case that dealt with, again, remember what the stakes are. Remember that we're not talking about going to jail, and we're not talking about fines of $1 million the way the OSC. We're talking about advice, decisions that you get to make as professionals, resolution of complaints, and a maximum suspension of pay of 90 days, which happens extremely infrequently. So that's part of why we don't necessarily see people lawyering up all the time to deal with these things. The idea is to create a culture of integrity and not to worry so much about gotcha. And that's why there are protections for you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could just, Councillor, there's also another route. The Bill 8 a couple of years ago extended oversight to the Ombudsman, the Ontario Ombudsman. So once an integrity commissioner has concluded the investigation or has not dealt with it, or the time to deal with it has expired, so those three things happen, then someone could apply to the Ontario Ombudsman and say, I think I have a problem with this. Could you review the decision-making process? Could you review this? And so the Ontario Ombudsman has jurisdiction in that limited scope.
Next on my list is Councillor George.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm going to stand like I do at regular council meetings. My butt's getting a little tender here. This has actually come at just about the right time. I'm going to be at the AMO board tomorrow and Friday, and one of the items that we're discussing is Bill 68 and some of the major concerns that the municipalities have. And I'm not going to go through all those, but I do wish to ask a question of the two of you, since you happen to be here this evening and we are dealing with our own code of conduct. And this is just a statement that comes out of our most recent report, and it simply says that AMO believes that the intent of providing other recourses besides the courts is worthy, so we certainly agree with that aspect of Bill 68. However, the proposed integrity commissioner regime goes too far, too fast. It brings an untried complexity that could result in unintended consequences and costs that will be difficult to determine, let alone manage. I'm just curious to know, based on what is the statement that's being made by AMO, how you as integrity commissioners hired by municipalities, and with your current knowledge of Bill 68 as it currently exists, and we know that there are proposed changes coming. In fact, AMO, we have a number of them that we're going to be putting forward. How do you feel about the role of the integrity commissioner and the governance of the local municipal codes as Bill 68 currently is being presented?
I'll start. Okay, and then you might have it. So, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor George, very significant changes being proposed. I'm not disputing that. I think there's going to, if they're all put in place the way they are now, you're going to have a number of municipalities who never thought they were going to have codes of conduct now having to think about this and go forward with that. Then there's a cost to it because you have to have an integrity commissioner who has to look after it. I think the province of Ontario has said, we think this is appropriate. We think not having a provincial-wide commissioner to look after this, let every municipality within a certain limited scope look after their own ethical conduct. We will prescribe certain things, but we'll let them do the rest. But there's going to be a cost with that. And I appreciate that that may be very difficult. And I also get that it's easy for Janet and I to say, hey, go and ask your integrity commissioner, but there is a cost to it. So I am very mindful of that. And I have discussed this with at least my clients, my municipal clients. It is a worry. I think there has to be some transition provisions put in. You can't just on a dime say this is now in place. You have to have all of this. You have to allow some transition. But I can't say that the system is wrong what they're proposing. So one of the things that I said is, when I spoke to the province about it, one of their policy folks let us have their ear, I said, I'm really surprised that you're letting the integrity commissioners weigh into the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. It's never actually been like that. It's always been an elector who goes to the court. And I said, I think it was set up on that system on purpose. And the response was, something that I actually expected was, it was, but that was 45 years ago now, 1972. Things may have changed. It's very expensive to get to court. Plus, a lot of municipalities don't have stipends or the ability of of a council member like you to be able to go and actually charge back your costs for getting an opinion from a lawyer on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So the province said, we think this is a way to allow local members to have the ability to get good advice from someone who's qualified to give them advice. Before, they had to go and get their own legal opinion if they wanted to know what their rights were and what they should be doing. So that's the response on the other side. But yes, significant changes, and it's going to change the landscape pretty dramatically, I think. And I acknowledge that there is a cost to municipalities to have this regime in place.
Maybe I'll just note, as I said at the beginning, Councillor George, through you, Mr. Mayor, that Kingston's actually ahead of the curve on the broad strokes. You've already got a code of conduct. You've had one for some time. You've now had Integrity Commissioner Services for almost a year, and you're proposing and looking ahead to having someone. So on those pieces, you won't be severely surprised or affected. As to some of the details in Bill 68, I expressed some concern about one aspect, but it's my opinion, which is not really relevant.
No, and I think we all recognize that. And in fact, I think...
Councillor George, I'm just going to make a comment. Just for a couple people, if you could just speak a little bit louder. I think we're streaming this meeting and we've had a couple of problems with the sound. So if you can just, just so we can get all the audio picked up.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now? Yeah, well, and I totally agree with your comment that we are somewhat ahead of probably the majority of municipalities out there, because I know for a fact, I've been told by colleagues on AMO that they in fact have taken our code of conduct from our website and they're using that as a template for their own. So, and that's good to know that we've got something to offer out there. So it certainly will be an interesting discussion Friday, but I'm glad to hear your response. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Wow, this has been fascinating. My first question, it's a comment that leads to a question. In the definitions, member is defined as a person who member of council or member of a committee of council. But under our code of conduct, it looks like complaints under code of conduct can go to members who are members of the council or committees, but if it's a complaint under the municipal municipal conflict of interest, it only pertains to councillors. Would that be correct? Not members of committees?
That's correct. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act only applies to members, and that's members of council or any of those local boards.
But in our definition under Code of Conduct, members includes members
Members of committees.
of our committees. But it does not include members of our boards that are appointed by city councilors? Or do we know?
That's correct. At this time, it does not.
It does not. Okay, thank you. Under informal complaint procedure, I understand this will be on our website, and the first statement says, any individual who identifies or witnesses behavior or activity by a member that they believe contravenes the Code of Conduct may seek to address the prohibited behavior or activity themselves. This seems to presuppose that the individual has seen prohibited behavior. It doesn't say possible prohibited behavior. Was that done on purpose?
I think what we were trying to accomplish with this was to have it be as plain language as possible. And I've seen versions that say the alleged. It's not meant to presuppose that something has happened that's a breach, just that the person who has seen it believes it to be prohibited. If you think it should be more specific, it would be open to you to put that in. We were trying to balance not too much legalese, but to really get to the main point, which is try to resolve it yourself.
Yes, and actually that's wonderful, because this is the first time I've seen this where it basically says, why don't you two talk about it? The B says advise a third party about the concerns regarding the member's action. How would the individual who's making the complaint know who the third party would be that they should talk to?
Well, again, this does come a bit with the role of being public, giving public education. Some versions of this say a relevant third party. So for example, just by reaching out and asking, okay, tell me how this works, what could I do? And the advice can be given, oh, you're a member of staff, tell your supervisor, have it documented. Or maybe it's somebody who has a mentor or a guide or someone they trust. It's somebody, it's just giving it to a third person who has some interest in the well-being of the complainant to assist them.
Okay, that's good. I'm not sure that an individual would understand that. It's basically saying, ask a friend. Ask someone you trust before you move forward, although it comes a little later in the list, but I think that's basically what it's saying.
Sure, yeah.
Sort of check yourself. To do with client, first I'll start with, if someone has made a complaint against a counselor, we've sort of skirted, the Integrity Commissioner is in this code to give advice or do investigations. It doesn't say during an investigation, give advice. So we seem to have two roles that are quite separate. So once an investigation is launched, and of course many counselors don't realize this is coming, is the Integrity Commissioner's role to also offer some advice during the investigation or just do the investigation?
In my view, and the way I've always done this, is I always look for opportunities to resolve so that you can convert a formal investigation into an informal complaint with the consent of everybody involved. And I can tell you there have been times when I've had complaints where I have said to the complainant, look, if I approach the counselor and invite them to ask me for advice on the point, would you be satisfied? And because that's part of the relationship. The relationship is to try to resolve things wherever possible. Not everything is, but many things are. So I don't see them as watertight compartments, and I don't think the way this is drafted would require that.
Okay, that clarifies. So it is, there has been, certainly for me, a feeling that when there's a complaint filed, you back off and try to work it out, maybe hire yourself an outside counselor, but that the Integrity Commissioner is trying to sort of cut off at that point if there's an investigation started. So there's been a confusion about that, I would say.
Well, and I think it's, again, because it's relatively new to this municipality, but any complaint begins, once it's classified as in jurisdiction, if it hasn't been dismissed for other reasons, the copy of the summary of the complaint or a copy of the material goes to the counselor, and that's a really key point in time for the counselor to say, oh, I never thought of it this way, or oh, here's some information, or I would be willing to meet with the person. It doesn't have to be formal all the way to the end, and there are off-ramps available. And that can also be the subject of education and getting used to how these processes work.
Yes, I think that's extremely important. Do counselors get all complaints that are made against them?
Not always. If there is no jurisdiction, if it's a complaint with no basis to it, it tends to be dismissed. Now, the responsibility, though, is to come back to council and report generally on the work. And you have seen some reports, because you haven't had a complaint protocol, where something's been dismissed, but all the material's anonymized, because it's has always struck me as fair and open to at least say this is what happened, but there's no need to publish names if there is no finding of a breach or it's without jurisdiction. What happens in other jurisdictions is often kind of an omnibus report, where you'll say that this many complaints, this many dismissed, and the only ones that come to council unless exceptional circumstances are findings that recommend a finding of a breach.
Great, thank you. I'll have a little question about statistics after, but solicitor-client privilege under this process, who's affected? When someone's made a complaint and the Integrity Commissioner is dealing with it, is the solicitor-client privilege with the Integrity Commissioner and the complainant, or all parties, the person complained against a councillor or a member of a committee, are all three under privilege?
I take the view that it's not a solicitor-client relationship. That would be fraught, because an Integrity Commissioner would end up with conflicts all over the place. I see it more as a quasi-adjudicative and investigative inquiry role, and it's housed under the Public Inquiries Act. I'd be interested in what John thinks about it, but no, there is statutory secrecy balanced by the need to report in a transparent way and to include as much information as the Integrity Commissioner feels is appropriate. That is a delicate balance that every one of us thinks about every time we bring something forward, to not include people's personal information, not to name complainants, only to name the counselor if there's a breach. But it's not, in my view, a solicitor-client relationship.
Thank you. It does come back to the idea of openness, transparency, which as counselors we do hear about a lot, that perhaps there are times when we do, I think also as counselors, we have to balance secrecy with transparency. And it can be in terms of a question that's come up that somehow we can answer to the public in general, so that the public generally knows. I did not know tonight that I'm, as we are all covered, with no pecuniary interest when we're on boards. Actually, my friend Councillor McLaren told me tonight when I said some of us are having questions about it, and he said, well, it's under bylaw 1. I thought, well, I should have asked Jeff first. Yeah, and he got it right. That was terrific. So it's to do with statistics. Will we, during the reporting period of and I suppose we'll do this with any Integrity Commissioner, the reporting period, find out if Kingston tends to have more complaints per population size than other, per 100,000. We have 30, some other city has 10, and perhaps that means we have a very excited population, or we have councillors that are more questionable at times. So we'll get that as a kind of statistic?
You would get what your numbers are, but because there are so many municipalities, I wouldn't recommend that as a good use of your resources, a kind of more broad social science research. I mean, I suppose you could ask the Integrity Commissioner to provide you with some information about similarly sized cities, but remember, everybody's on a different stage of the curve in terms of adoption of these policies, and some places they spike way up depending on what's happening in office, and then they go back down. So it's a tough sample size to compare. I'm not sure it'd be useful information, and it might not be a good use of resources.
Thank you. It does sort of seem to go up and down depending on, as you said, the level of intense concentration by members of the public on the situation at hand. We've often said, every vote we take, we can't abstain. Somebody's going to be mad at us. And the more important and, interested the community is, the more likely things are going to go a certain way. So I think that was it, and I'll see what happens in the next little while. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're now on round 2 of questions. So first on my list is Councillor Candon.
Thank you, and through you. A lot of councillors have touched on this, and I'm going to try to cut to the chase as specifically as I can. I feel like this meeting probably wouldn't even be happening if we had a definition of a conflict of interest that was cut and dry. So for example, if you're not at arm's length and you're not benefiting financially, you don't have a conflict of interest. My understanding when I received legal advice was that was the way the city had done business previously. I can live with that. That's very easy. We could all be at home right now. This would be very straightforward.
So before you go into personal, I think you've asked a good question.
So why are we why are we overcomplicating this? A lot of people come into this room extremely confused, me being one of them. We're going to leave confused. We're going to have issues with people not running for municipal politics because we can't even define what a conflict of interest is. Why are we overcomplicating this? Why don't we just make it simple?
Question?
Why don't we just make it simple?
Answer, please.
I guess it's not a simple thing to define that simply, Councillor Candon. I'm not really sure how to say it, and I thought Janet answered it pretty well before when she said, it entails this bundle of things and interests, I've been told, well, give me examples. Tell me, do an annotated version. But I'm not sure that would get to it, and I don't think it would really cover the situation. But it's your code, and if there's a proposal and you think it will work, then it's council's prerogative to go and put forward that definition. I think we've talked about it and we've discussed it, and I think what we put forward was something that was a consensus between us, that we thought it would work. And is it perfect? Will it on its face tell you every time you fall within it? Probably not, but it gives you the general sense and scope of what is supposed to be covered.
My follow-up question is, if we have a very vague and subjective code of conduct, we will be giving so much power to an integrity commissioner who is not elected and did not get voted on by their peers, that they are going to have a God complex. At least they'll have the perception of that. Whether they do or they don't, I'm not saying they will. But someone will say, you're putting all of the power in one person's, let's say there's a really controversial vote, and that integrity commissioner over time gains a reputation of voting a certain way. Whether they like it or don't, that will happen. Trust me. And we will be giving all of our power as elected officials to one person to decide on what could be a close vote. If we had a conflict of interest mandate that was very specific, we wouldn't have that problem. But now we may be giving a huge amount of power to people who really weren't elected to have that power. That's a concern that I have. How do you feel about how would you feel being put in that position as an integrity commissioner, that you're open to a huge amount of criticism, and so would we, based on not being able to define a true policy?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Candon, I don't know what to say other than I think we've put forward what we thought was the best way to cover it. If people perceive that it's ambiguous and wrong and incorrect, They may think that. I've ruled on certain things and I've been criticized. I stand by my rulings. People can criticize, they can question who was elected the President of the United States for whatever reason. You may agree, disagree, it doesn't really matter. People will have an opinion. I think all we're saying is, Ms. Leeper and I put forward, I thought, what I believe to be the best scheme. It's council's decision to say it doesn't make sense to us, or I think we can do better.
And I think that the other point to make is that the power is yours. It's not ours. We're advisors. Yes, we investigate, but it's always on your behalf. You decide sanction. You decide whether or not to accept or just receive, to adopt or receive. You decide whether to accept advice. And it's open to you to go and get outside advice yourself. It's open to you to bring new facts. It's intended to be a supportive relationship, first and foremost, even though it doesn't feel that way when a ruling doesn't go your way.
Okay, next on my list is Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you. The last time I was governed by a code of conduct, it was through the College of Teachers. And the College of Teachers, and there's some case law that supports this, says a teacher is a teacher 24/7, 365 days a year. Is there ever a time when I can feel comfortable that I'm no longer a counselor, that I can kick up my heels or whatever?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, you've hit a really great point. That's something that has become a bone of contention in a number of instances. You are all council members. You are elected representatives. Do you do it 24/7? Do you do it 365 days a week? Or do you shut off at a certain time? I was asked to give an opinion a little while ago as to what is the role of a council in general? What is the role of a council member? And I looked at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs says there's three aspects to it, but one of them is a representative of the community. And a lot of codes will foster that language. And I say, well, if you're a representative of the community and you're out on a Saturday night, and maybe, you're a little happy, and, to use the famous words, maybe you've had a couple of pops, and there may be issues with that. I see that, quite honestly, my own personal views, I see you as being elected representatives of the community. Your job doesn't really cease when you leave the council chamber or a meeting at a hall where you're, I think it does continue. I appreciate that there is personal and public life, but it's really hard to sometimes make those distinctions. And I've had to grapple with that. People posting things on social media. Hey, I did it on Twitter under my own account. Did you see the Twitter's use of the Twitter sphere? I'm there, but you're talking about council business. It's very obvious, and you're maligning a whole bunch of people, and you're doing it in very profane and disparaging terms. I'm sorry, you appear to have breached the code of conduct. And I've been met, well, I'm a part-time counselor. I have another job, and you're not properly considering. It's really tough, but I don't think we could, I don't think I can stand back and say, well, just because you're writing from your home computer and you're spilling vitriol into the Twitter sphere doesn't mean that you're not doing it possibly as a council member. And so there's that representative role.
Thank you. And that reminds me of a follow-up for Councillor Holland's comments earlier. I have been on social media, Facebook and Twitter. It now self-identifies as councillor for Williamsville. At election time, I always had identified as a candidate.
So, Deputy Mayor Neal, you're going to ask a general question here, right?
Okay, generally,
not a specific.
If we take our personal social media accounts and clearly separate our role as counselor once we declare as a candidate, does that, and if we use our own telephone, personal telephone, does that allow for that distance between candidate and counselor?
It certainly may, depending on the particular facts. But yes, I understand what you're saying, and there are instances, like I said before, there's no clear, bright line that I can say in every case. But yeah, when you become a candidate and you've filed your nomination papers, then all of a sudden it's a different regime. In fact, I think we have something in the Code of Conduct, doesn't it? There's a blackout period for election periods. So, I mean, yes, so to answer your question simply, yes, I think that there is some division there.
Thank you. And a follow-up for Councillor Schell. You mentioned that in the lead up to an investigation, that there's full confidence, or it's fully privileged, any conversation that you might have with a counselor. How is that covered for confidentiality if there isn't a client solicitor relationship considered there?
Yes, I wouldn't actually use the word privilege because that has a term in law, but the Act talks about secrecy, and it's really a statutory form of confidentiality where the Integrity Commissioner's work is to be carried out under that secrecy. But obviously, because there's a report in public and all the reports are public, then you shift into what goes into the report.
Okay, and a question, and this is probably to staff. The $1,500 per year allowed for legal expenses, there can be really, in a calendar year, 2 complex legal issues that can eat up that. Are we going to be charged for those opinions we seek from the Integrity Commissioner as well, and will that therefore diminish the $1,500 allowance that we have for legal opinions?
Sayo Hunt.
Through your worship, so the Integrity Commissioner is hired by council to give advice to council and or council members individually, and that will be paid as part of the fees for the Integrity Commissioner service, so that would not be a prescribed fee to a particular member of council. With respect to the policy that we have of reimbursement, that policy has been around for a number of years. It is a protocol that includes getting permission to use that policy and to request the reimbursement appropriately. If council sees that that is not insufficient in terms of the overall maximum amount on an annual basis, we can have council work with us to change that policy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's the correct answer. Thank you. My other question, a citizen dropped off 2 quick questions, and I thought I knew the answers to both of these, but now hearing that it isn't a client solicitor privilege, but I will read the questions. And the one question, given that council and hence taxpayers are paying for the legal opinion, what is the nature of solicitor-client privilege? I believe that that's sacred, the client-solicitor privilege. If I go to, regardless of who pays the bill, if I go to a lawyer and seek information that is protected under client, or if I go to a city solicitor, that's protected. Is that correct?
Yes to 1, no to 2. The city solicitor is not your individual solicitor. She's here to serve the public and the city, but there are lots of third-party pay relationships where the privilege is yours. So anyone who's covered by legal aid, it's your privilege what you tell your lawyer.
Thank you. And the other question that was asked, and I think I do have the correct answer for this one, is what prevents removal from council as a penalty. And as I understand it, that is not allowable penalty under the Code of Conduct. So I can just tell the citizen that's not.
Not available. That's the Municipal Act.
And is there a double indemnity kind of thing? If somebody in the public perceives that I'm in a potential pecuniary interest, I vote, there's an integrity commissioner report that says I was in breach. Is that the end of it under the law, or might I still face that judicial nightmare of a Conflict of Interest Act?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor, yes, you may still. So if I understand the situation, someone believes that you have a pecuniary interest and directs the inquiry to the Integrity Commissioner. The Integrity Commissioner makes a determination that, yes, I think you have breached the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Have I got the facts right? Then the Integrity Commissioner could bring that forward to the court. The elector, the person themselves can bring that forward to the court. So there's still that possibility. It doesn't end just with the Integrity Commissioner saying, yes, there is a breach. The Integrity Commissioner would likely be looked at to take it forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll be able, when we finish the question period, to move an amendment at that time,
Yes,
more
so once
appropriately?
questions are done, then
Okay.
we'll be on the floor and we can entertain.
Thank you.
amendments.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Next on my list is Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Just a quick question, a couple of quick questions actually in regards to this. In your opinion, would it make it easier to follow these policies if councillors were full-time as opposed to part-time, seeing as then they wouldn't essentially be pulled in multiple different directions? Everybody's always going to have their personal and family sort of conflicts, but in this instance, in your experience with policies like this and part-time councillors in other municipalities, that adds another layer of complexity. Is that true? And then, I mean, as far as this policy goes, obviously it would add an additional layer of concern for most people, right? So is that a fair statement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't know. You're saying because it's only really a part-time role, so council members are expected to not be able to survive on just this remuneration, so therefore they work. I'm not sure it adds another layer I think it's complex enough as it is. Perhaps I'm not trying to evade the question, maybe, but I'm not. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms.
I think it would affect the nature of your conflicts. I think it's just another factor and a feature. It depends on your relationships. Somebody with a big family who all work for developers are going to have a different set of conflicts than an only child who is working for somebody out of the city. So it'll depend on the person more.
Would it be probable that the more things you're involved in, though, the greater the number of conflicts you could potentially have, in which case you'd be going through this policy and to the IC more often?
Quite possibly, sure.
Okay.
I mean, we all get into conflicts when we say yes to too many things, right? It's not just public-private. That's the nature of being too many things. Sometimes they conflict.
I just wanted also to clarify one thing. I thought I heard earlier a statement about this policy where you don't get to know who lodged the complaint if it goes to a formal complaint process. Is that accurate?
No, you find out the name of the complainant. There are no anonymous formal complaints.
Okay, and then in following that up, so hypothetically, if somebody were a property manager or had something, some type of job or position in the city, but they were voting on something that was completely unrelated, but they were a property manager, and this had to do with a different property, say in the total other end of the city. does that mean that that person could never vote on any planning matters or anything to relate to properties, or would there have to be a direct connection? The reason I ask is because I'm more confused. I understand the intent, but I'm more confused than ever almost with this as to what is apparent, what is real, and so far, I think I've heard, don't know what to say, no clear line, it may, perhaps, and that to me makes this policy seem very subjective, which concerns me, and I think concerns most people, is with not having examples built into this policy, it's, if we're confused, my fear is, do you also agree that the average person may be more confused? And have we actually fixed anything, and do you think we can do better? Do you think we can make this more clear? Because we're supposed to follow this, but we seem to be more confused than ever. So can we make this better?
I think the answer is to seek advice if you are confused. There are actually, we've talked about objective markers of conflict, which are roles, relationships, or financial interests that are in your private or non-public life that could divide your loyalties between your public and private interest. That's not a bad working definition of conflict of interest. And by putting in examples, you could put in some examples if you wanted to. If you think it would help you, you could draft some examples.
I definitely think that at that point, just for the understanding of it, for the people and for also us, if we could, what would be the mechanism to kick this back, I guess, to have some concrete sort of examples, realizing they would not be all encompassing, but it would give some clarity to some of the definitions in these, because we're still dealing with something that seems not black and white, but gray and subjective. So in any math course, when you're learning, here's an example, and almost any school course, here's an example, this is how it works. But it seems like with this, it's, well, it may, but maybe not, everything's unique. And so how do we take that?
Well, the slides had 3 examples. The danger in putting examples into a code of this kind, because of the fact that conflicts arise in all different factual situations, is that it could be more confusing to put in 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 examples, because then along is going to come example number 11, and people will try to fit it into that, and then it becomes problematic. So sure, you could do it, but that's an argument against doing it. It requires common sense, it requires some judgment, it requires a guide who is standing outside of the conflict. That's why if it's about you and your business, you don't ask your partner, hey, do you think I have a conflict? Your partner's going to have the same blind spot that you do, potentially, because you may have a financial interest. The Integrity Commissioner will have no financial interest in what it is you're about, and that's the nature of the role that helps protect you. And it will never be black and white. That's just the nature of what conflict is.
So if I'm to understand that, by giving examples of what a conflict is, we would actually make a conflict more confusing, or the perception of a conflict?
I don't know how helpful it would be. And it could be confusing because somebody might try to argue, well, those are the only conflicts that this council has put in their code of conduct, so I'm not any of those 3, so I'm okay. I would worry about concrete thinking if you used a number of examples.
I guess my concern with that then is that if trying to define something makes it more confusing, it's already pretty confusing to begin with, which means how are we supposed to operate within this policy?
Well, Mr. Mayor, through you, Councillor Bohm, I'm not sure how we can say it otherwise. You have the ability to go to the Integrity Commissioner and get advice on it. It is so difficult, and again, I get asked numerous times a year, here's my fact situation. And then it seems to come back and it's a little different than that. I go, hold on, if I had actually known that one key point, the whole thing would have changed. And so Everything is very fact specific, and if you have any doubts, you should go to the Integrity Commissioner, and the Integrity Commissioner can say, look, this is the best advice that I can give to you. I think Mr. Hunt's indicated that there is some amount of money that you can go and get an independent assessment if you don't agree with that. And I understand what you're saying. You may say, wow, trying to think of an example. Someone who has a printing company in the municipality, okay? Clearly, printing contracts at the municipality would be something that person might not be speaking. What about recycling? Is that something that this person may or may not be interested in? What about something to do with a manufacturing ink plant that's meant to go into that? Would that be something that this person might have a more germane interest to than not? Don't know. You'd have to kind of think about those. And I think even if we put those examples down, I'm not sure it would help out the person who has that specific issue about being the owner or the operator or the manager of a printing company. I just don't know that you can get that finite.
So could we essentially, though, put in some, because I mean, usually you guys go back to some type of case law or some type of previous example. Would it be possible to put some in where this is clearly a conflict, and then an example of this was where there was a perceived conflict that ended up not being a conflict, with the understanding in the policy and the wording right with it that this is not a catch-all, but some examples to go off of what was apparent and real and what was potentially deemed frivolous or vexatious, so that everybody can, I guess, sort of start from the same point and realizing it will never catch everything, but it would at least give everybody a touch point to begin with as to what may or may not be a conflict, apparent or real, perceived, non-perceived, non-pecuniary, pecuniary.
So as with laws, the place to do that isn't always in the law, it's in the cases. In our case, it would be in the reports to council. This was dismissed. That's when you'll start to see it develop. You've already had a couple of conflict of interest issues, and there's discussion. And council adopted those or received those and approved them. So you have already started to create what we would call your own jurisprudence, which is just a fancy way of saying applying the law in a real set of facts. And that's where you're going to get those examples.
So that would educate us, but how would that help to educate the public who may not follow all those things quite as closely? I guess my whole goal is with this policy to get everybody on the same page, whereas if it stipulates in the policy what it is, we can always refer back, because in any conflict of interest or pecuniary or non-pecuniary issue, we will always go back to the policy, which means if it's not in the policy, it's kind of like it was in a report somewhere that maybe that person didn't read. So if we're always going back to the policy, does it not make sense to have something in there? Because we seem to have heard it from most people that we haven't clearly defined it, and I think I know I'm more confused than ever, and I want to do the right thing. I'm just not sure anymore what that is.
I think our answer a number of times has been, we don't think that would be helpful. It's your code, you can decide to. It's not possible to nail down every possible example, but we've given you a definition. We've given you examples of what would be preventative, like remoteness, too small. And presumably any report from an integrity commissioner, it's public, it's part of the public record, and it could also be put in a separate place alongside the code. There are ways to do that to make sure the public can go to one spot on your website and find these rulings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm the next one on the list, so I just wanted to just jump off of what you just shared. So if I understand correctly, what you're recommending is that within the policy, we can't include those specific examples. What we could do is we could have the policy, and then as a education/communication piece, we could have a separate spot where people could scroll through some examples of cases that would help to define what would be a conflict and what isn't. Is that correct?
Actually, that's an excellent point, and you've just reminded me, Mr. Mayor, that in Toronto, the Integrity Commissioner would take examples anonymized of advice every year, put them into FAQs, report to council, and then put them on the website so that you would build a set of here's how it's being applied here. And that allows you also to debate that. So that may be a way to deal with it without kind of muddying your code of conduct.
Okay, thank you. So that's something I'm going to suggest later. Again, I know we've been dancing around this for 3 hours, but I think just to perhaps provide a little bit of reassurance for council. When you say the word apparent, is it fair to say that you mean it's fairly obvious to an average person? So what I think part of the concern around the council table is that it's excluding one individual that has an extreme view that it's apparent to them, and therefore that makes it an apparent conflict. Can you give us some reassurance on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about an objective. It's about the reasonable person. It's not about somebody who says, aha, you have a conflict because of some illogical set of steps that they're looking at. It has to be looked at through the lens of the reasonable person, and that's who you want as your integrity commissioner, somebody who can kind of channel that set of reasonableness against community standards and give you good advice.
Okay.
So, yes.
My other question is, and again, perhaps to provide some reassurance to council on this, can you give us an indicator of other codes of conduct in other municipalities? Is this language that you have provided, is that common? So is that what you would find in most other codes of conduct, or is there different language around conflict of interest? Can you give us some idea? Is this a best practice?
I, quite frankly, took a lot from looking at Toronto and Ottawa because those are both bigger centers, and Kingston is a bigger center. A lot of people have looked to Toronto's and then imported it. I think you said, Councillor George, that some people are looking at yours. These things get passed around. Every time I look at these, though, I try to find a way. Can I use plainer language? Can I express the same ideas? But there's nothing earth-shattering or different in any of the sets of expectations that are here. And I'll let John has seen other municipalities, so he can comment too.
Yeah, our methodology in this one, quite honestly, is Janet and I divided it up, and she took on the responsibility of putting together the first draft. And she said, "Look, I think I'm going to look at this and this. Why don't you have a look at it, and what do you think?" And I said, "That's great. Why don't you put something together, and we'll look at." Best practices, things that we think have worked or not worked in other municipalities. In fact, as we were driving down, we were discussing a couple of points and on things that might still be tweaked or so. So that was it. We really did look at and considered other municipalities. As Janet said, Toronto and Ottawa were, I guess, the main ones initially. I certainly then looked at some of the ones that I had dealt with that I felt very comfortable with certain aspects of it, and we modified and spoke about it and put the language together. So that was the methodology.
Thank you. The one other question that I have, it's a little bit more technical, and it relates to something that Councillor Schell had raised in the informal complaint procedure about this advising a third party, and I agreed with Councillor Schell. I found that very confusing. First of all, advising a third party about the concerns regarding the member's actions, is that a requirement, or is that just a potential step that somebody could follow if they want to?
These are a number of suggestions. It's not a tick-the-box exercise, and you could, even if you wanted to, put brackets behind the person and say, for example, a supervisor, a friend, a close family member. You could do that if you wanted to sort of signal this is what we're talking about.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, next on my list, Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Okay, and so this is a connection. Section 1.2 refers to all the various laws that are included or that we have to be governed by, and one of those, of course, is the Municipal Act. And the Municipal Act in Section 232 refers to our oath of office. And so it strikes me that this should be somehow in sync with our code of conduct. And the first question, I guess, has sort of been answered several times because you've mentioned that you don't want necessarily hard and fast definitions, because then there's a whole myriad of infinite number of possibilities with facts that get in the way, and that a neutral, impartial, objective integrity commissioner should look out and separate the passion, I guess, from the objective truth, right? So in that sense, this question is more to staff. We have 3 new words in the oath that are not directly in the code of conduct: truly, faithfully, and impartially exercise this office. It would strike me that they should at least be consistent with each other. Is there any problems with having these different words in these two documents?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McLaren, no, I don't see a problem with it. In fact, my partner Leo Longo wrote a paper, I think now it's about 10 years ago, where he looked at the code, the declaration of office, the oath of office under 232 of the Municipal Act, and he aligned each of those to the specific statutory provisions to which they relate to. So there's one that talks about not taking the impartial performance of your duties, and that really relates to the criminal code provisions, municipal corruption, breach of trust, fraud, all those things. Of course, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act says I shall declare a direct or indirect pecuniary interest in accordance with the Municipal Act, and then there's can't even remember, there's a third one that relates to some of the provisions that are contained within the Municipal Act itself, obligations under there. So I don't think that just because those words aren't used exactly in the Code of Conduct that they're disjunctive in any way, or they don't align with what the actual oath of office says.
Good, great. The second one is the second clause tells us that we are not to accept payment, reward, or promise. Yet here in section 8.2, we've got a list of ways that we can accept that. Does one override the other? Like this oath, which is mandated by the Municipal Act from the province, and this is a Council Act, it would suggest that the oath takes precedence, but I just want to double check there. Is there any conflict there or supremacy?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, through you. Yes, supremacy. If there's any conflict, then Section 14 of the Municipal Act applies, and it says, to the extent that there is any conflict with superior legislation, province or federal, then the municipal bylaw is not in effect to the extent of the conflict. So there is supremacy. I don't think that those sections that talk about you being able to have some benefit are not in line with what those provisions of the oath say. And it's those actually provisions of the oath that go to the criminal code provisions where you can't take a secret profit in order to vote in a certain way. Again, breach of trust, municipal corruption. So I don't see them as disjunctive at all.
Wonderful, thank you. And I guess the last one says we have to be true to the Queen. I guess that means we are illegal to be Republicans in Canada. Is that correct?
Is that a question for the Code of Conduct, Councillor McLaren?
Yeah,
in the sense that the Code of Conduct demands that we follow the Municipal Act, and the Municipal Act says that we have to follow the oath. And the oath says, and I can quote it here because I just brought it up here a second ago, that the last part of the oath specifically says, I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, which suggests that if there's movements in Australia and India and Pakistan to become republics, and I assume that would be illegal in this regime?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know. The simple matter is we live in a constitutional monarchy, and I think that's just an historical context. I have a problem with it myself. When I had to be called to the bar, I really had difficulty. I didn't mouth the words. Please don't tell anybody.
Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Process question. Part A, informal complaint. Part B, formal complaint, filing of complaint. Is the intent of this that all complaints will actually go through the city clerk, so that even if an integrity commissioner gets a complaint through a customer service call, through direct email, that the integrity commissioner this clerk will be like the focus person who collects the data of the numbers?
The clerk would receive all the formal complaints. That's just to make sure that there's a proper administrative flow. But on the informal complaint side, those can come in directly, and normally there would be contact information on the city website explaining all this to the public so that they would know what to do, and telling them, oh, what is an informal complaint, and here's the process, because some people may not want to swear an affidavit or collect all the information. They just might want a simple matter resolved. So there's two ways, really.
So I think what the Province of Ontario website Ombudsman website basically has a little square practically on the first page, and you just start emailing. So that's the sort of thing you're contemplating, or that our staff will work out what that's going to look like?
We wouldn't contemplate a formal investigation being initiated that way. The whole point being that it's a significant step, there's significant powers, so there's the affidavit required that would have to be filed and then brought. But the informal, sure, make it as easy and accessible as possible, encourage people to do things informally wherever possible.
Yeah, I guess even that's a little, I'm always, how do people get information? The biggest complaint we have is communication and getting information. A website that just allowed people to do an informal complaint presumably would come directly to the person involved, the counselor involved, or the committee person involved, or it would still have to go and they wouldn't even know how to get a hold of a committee member.
Because the informal mechanism contemplates not involving the integrity commissioner necessarily, but going directly to the member, raising, and you know what you could do, and there are lots of ways to do this, but we had posters that count. Now you don't have offices here, so it's a little different. You'd want to maybe do it online, but we had Integrity Matters Here posters that every counselor put up saying, look, if you've got an issue, talk to me. If you want some advice or information, go there. You can come up with creative ways to communicate about how your ethics regime works.
I guess that actually leads to a question. We have many members of committees, and this covers members of our committees as well. And that's what I mean. It starts to get difficult to do an informal complaint to Joe Snow, who is a member of the Arts Advisory Committee. You wouldn't even know how to contact him through a website. That's what I mean. So we've got to work out how to funnel this information, especially informally, and actually Joe Snow doesn't even know that this exists currently. We'll have to let all our committee members know when we pass this that they are now subject to conflict of interest.
That's right. Well, your former code of conduct bundled in members of committees, so presumably you had some training for them when they joined, hopefully. That can be done as well by a way of update. And you're right, more of an operational matter, but it's something that staff would have to look at.
So I think now that we're formalizing this so completely, it becomes vital that all our committee members will know all of this, because they'll have questions too. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Neal.
Very brief question. I know that a lot of people in the public, and even perhaps on council, talk about pecuniary interest as if it's voting for benefit. But as I understand it, pecuniary interest is any financial impact it may have on me, both positive or negative. There were 6 councillors in retail in the 90s. 3 were charged for voting against Sunday shopping. The 3 who voted for were never taken to court. And the defense at the time was, well, it negatively impacted my business, and that was considered irrelevant. Is that's still the case in the definition?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Neal, yeah, that's exactly the case. A pecuniary interest is a financial interest. It's been said in several cases, and it's either a gain or a loss. It's either positive or negative. Could be either one. So exactly the situation that you brought up.
Thank you. And so the confidentiality rule for the commissioner, any complaints filed through the clerk's office, that would go directly from the clerk to the commissioner.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, let's get to the item of business that's before us. So we have our proposed code of conduct. That is item 1B. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to it? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I've been really helped by this, and it makes a lot more sense. I had a lot of questions with regards to definitions, and it's been cleared up for me. I mean, it makes much better sense that we don't have some definitions as clear as we would like, as I may have thought I would like in the earlier. I also like the fact that we're being given an updated version of this book, because I did read an earlier version, and it was a legal education. I also very much appreciate the fact that you take so much time to actually answer questions on conversations and in emails, and I think you mentioned you had 12, and I think I must have been 8 of them or something. So thank you for that. I'm very happy with this. I just, as I mentioned earlier, and as I think you had suggested, was that the word spirit might be better to add into this thing, because I notice it's also in section 6.1. The word is actually there, but not in the in section 2. Is there any downside if we were to make an amendment and add the word and spirit after the word letter, so that we follow the letter and spirit of the laws of Canada?
I can't think of one. It was good enough for the City of Toronto. Nothing really turned on it, but it's really in line with the highest standards. So it means you don't get overly legalistic and try to come right up against the line, and it informs the advice that your integrity commissioner would give you. So I think it helps you.
Thank you. In that case, I'd like to move a motion that I've already given to the clerk.
Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? Okay, so we have a motion to amend that would add the words "and spirit" into section 2.2 of the Code of Conduct. It's moved by Councillor McLaren. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Neal. Any discussion? We will call the vote on the motion to amend. Please vote. And that carries. Councillor McLaren, you have the floor.
Thank you. And just to finish off, I'd like to say that I'm very happy with this, and I am going to support this. I believe that it's going to help continue a legal education that all of us need. I believe that this is going to give light where perhaps in the past there was darkness. And I'm actually looking forward to many more conversations on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Neal.
Yes, I also have an amendment that was shared with the clerk, that the recommendation in Report 37, Section 1B, be amended by the deletion of "given 3 readings," replaced by "given first and second reading." And that's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McLaren.
Just 1 second. Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? Okay, so we have a motion to amend. It's been put forward by Deputy Mayor Neal to replace 3 readings with first and second readings. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McLaren. A discussion? Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you. I did share this with both the mayor and our clerk earlier prior to the meeting. I think given the complexity of this report, and given the fact that this is the first opportunity, really, for us to hear the full rationale for the recommendations, and the first opportunity probably for the public to hear as well, I think it's sensible, unless there's some overwhelming, compelling reason why this would be time sensitive. I would think that this would be a good step towards transparency and open government. I will say, in a broader context, we seem to increasingly be doing all 3 readings at the same council meeting. And unless it's time sensitive, I kind of question that happening as frequently as it does. But in this specific case, I believe we should have an opportunity for a sober second look and an opportunity for the public to weigh in on this. So I hope this passes. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will call the vote on the motion to amend. Please vote. And that carries. Deputy Mayor Neal, you have the floor and you have 4 minutes on the clock.
Thank you. I won't take that long, I promise. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I believe it may have even been unanimously in the very early in our first term, we voted against the idea of having an integrity commissioner permanently. And the rationale in part for that was that we had only, in countless years, needed the work of an integrity commissioner once. And so it seemed like it was an unwarranted expense. I have come to believe that that was a mistake because clearly our work is becoming more complex, and that's reflected in the fact that we have had a number of complaints. And we need some kind of procedure and protocol to handle that. And this is an excellent first, second, and step towards achieving that. So I will be voting in favor of accepting this. And I look forward to hearing from the public in case there's necessary amendments that we can do at third reading stage.
Thank you. Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Sorry, I don't have one of the forms, but I thought I would see about adding to informal complaint procedure under B, advise a third party, for example, a friend. Just insert it there, please, if there's a second.
Okay, so that's a motion to amend, excuse me, Clause B under Part A, informal complaint procedure. So everyone has that, so it would say advise a third party, bracket, example, a friend. That's seconded by Councillor Bohm. Everyone's clear on this? Any discussion? No, Councillor McLaren? So this is on page 16, Clause B. So the amendment would read, to advise a third party, example, a friend, in brackets, about the concerns regarding the member's actions. Okay. Any further discussion? Call the question. And that carries. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I thought it, there we go. And it carries. Thank you. Deputy Mayor, will you take the chair?
I will, and I recognize you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think my comment is really on the last few questions we had after that extended Q&A, and certainly appreciate both Mr. Mascarin and Ms. Leeper being able to help navigate us through this. I really do believe that a major concern that a number of us had was this clarity issue around conflict of interest. And we've heard that it's a difficult animal. It's difficult to be able to describe and to define. And so in my view, what I've come to conclude is that the wording in the proposed code of conduct, I think, is the best that we can get it. But what we need is an education and communication plan around this code of conduct, excuse me, that can explain to council and to members of the public to understand what the code of conduct means in application and what conflict of interest means. I share Councillor Camden's concern that he raised earlier, that we want to make sure that we're sending a message to the broader community that you should not be afraid of running for council. No matter what your professional background, there is room for you at this table, and so people need to have that assurance. So I think it's this education and communication plan that's key. I was going to pass an amendment, but I did speak with the clerk, and I believe that there is wording in the bylaw itself. On page 27, part 5, it says to provide educational information and training to council, to members, and to the public on matters related to the Code of Conduct and issues of ethics and integrity, and to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So I guess my question then to staff is, as part of this education and communication plan, would we be able to craft on a website or in a place that would be accessible for members of the public examples and scenarios and cases that could help to illustrate what would and would not be a conflict of interest under the proposed Code of Conduct?
Through you, Your Worship, this would definitely be something that we would undertake. In conjunction, we believe it would be important to include the new Integrity Commissioner. That would be something that would help get the new Integrity Commissioner involved, as well as the chance to work on what would be some of the best initiatives we could undertake in that regard.
I'm pointing to the mayor, and
you have the chair,
I
Deputy
have the
Mayor.
chair. I apologize. CAO Hunt.
Perhaps I'd also add to that in the sense of indicating that I think there was some discussion near the end of the questions about building an inventory of questions and answers that could start to formulate additional clarity and information around this to educate people that are involved or concerned about certain situations. So I think we certainly also commit to building that as well, recognizing, of course, that those would reflect circumstances that were general and to some degree specific, but recognizing that people need to understand that each situation is specific. So in the application of it, there would still be a need to not just review the website, but to actually work with the Integrity Commissioner to help to get advice so that you, as an individual council member, in whatever circumstance you may have found yourself, could be assured that you were given the advice you needed to make a decision on the matter.
Thank you. So yes, absolutely, I would totally agree that this is a whole package here. So this is an advice package, an education piece, there's a communication piece, so it's not just a one silver bullet. We need a whole menu of options, and I'm encouraged, based on that answer, that we're going to have this framework put in place. One further question. So Ms. Nicholson, you mentioned that this would be in consultation with the new Integrity Commissioner. Can staff give us an indication of timing? If this proposed Code of Conduct passes tonight, when might we expect to have the new permanent Integrity Commissioner in place?
Through you, Your Worship. So if this is passed this evening, I think what has been indicated to council in the past, I believe, is that we'd put out a request for proposal. We would be prepared to do that as soon as possible to get that going.
Okay, thank you. So based on everything that I've heard tonight, I'm now at a point where I can support this. So I would ask council to support this. I think it's important to fill the vacuum that we currently have. I think, as we heard earlier, that right now we have an incomplete framework. All we have is a code of conduct, and I think that there's some urgency on our part to be able to put into place an updated code of conduct with an advice framework and an accountability framework, and get all the work started on this education and communication plan as well. That's not to say that this doesn't preclude us from making additional adjustments and changes moving forward if needed, but I think we need to have something in place, so I hope that council can support this. So thank you very much.
And I return the chair. to call the vote.
Thank you. So before we do that, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I'm cautiously optimistic with this. I still have some reservations just due to, obviously, some of the contentious ones are always going to be the ones that are subjective. So I think, you could have some of those decisions come down to a simple person's opinion, which gives me pause, and I think we'll all face criticism over that. I do really like the informal complaint process, the formal, and how it kind of really lays that out, because I know that, as the mayor mentioned, that was a vacuum that existed, so it does clear that up. I'm also a big fan of the amendment to kind of give this a little bit of time to percolate, to give us all, we've got a lot of information, there's been a lot of questions. There's the chance for confusion on this, but also a chance to go back and ask more questions on it before we go to the third and final reading. So with that being said, I think we can support this, and the truest test of any policy is simply enacting it and putting it into play. And I think with that being said, I'm sure over time there'll be adaptations and adaptations of this to minor things to refine it a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Canton.
Thank you, and through you. Sitting here tonight, I have a great deal of concerns, not necessarily for myself, but for the next person who sits in this chair. I don't think that we've really done anything that is going to prevent the problems that caused us to look at these particular things. I also question whether or not the advice we're getting is very good advice. I'm hearing things like Mrs. Leeper had mentioned, when the public hates something. First thing you learn in politics is you can't say the public hates something. The public is, there's 125,000 people who live in the city. You can't say the public this, the public that. I hear that term get thrown around a lot, and I think it's a rookie mistake to say the public doesn't like this, the public doesn't like that. There's a lot of different opinions in our community. So there's a red flag there, and there's a red flag also in the comments that were made about breaches of the code of conduct. Well, the people have a short memory. That is naive at the very, to put it lightly. It is not something that people forget about. I can't walk through the grocery store without it getting brought up. So I have a lot of concerns about the advice that we're getting. I am not confident in it, and I think that if this were just me as an individual in my regular life, I would not take this advice because I have a lot of concerns about a lot of concerns about the credibility of the advice that we're getting. I could expand on this for probably 30 minutes. I'm not going to. I'm not going to try to convince my colleagues to vote in a certain way. I may probably be the only person who votes against this, and I'm totally fine with that. But I would not feel that I would be leaving my seat as a person who's not going to run for council again in a good position, knowing that I feel like we're still exposed to people who have an agenda and want to come after you. You don't have anybody who's going to defend you. You don't have the right to a lawyer. You don't have the right to a proper process. And I genuinely feel that in my heart. Maybe I'm wrong. I realize that people are probably going to still support this, but I couldn't support this given the information that we had. I heard very few clear answers tonight. And I don't live my life that way. I don't expect others to live their life that way. And I hear a bunch of fluff that really isn't, there's no concrete here. And I'm concerned for that. As always, I feel like if I don't get my way on council, I'm totally fine with that. I know that the mayor's done this where he's taken a stance and he didn't necessarily get his way, but he still supported council. So I'm going to take that approach. I'm okay with being the minority here, but I also am not going to vote everyone's way because they did as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Shaw.
Sorry, I know it's late. Yes, I do, because this, I am on many, many boards and committees, and when we discuss conflict, and this will be, as I say, arts advisory or the ones that are, within the city that then are populated by members who are members of the public, and we start to talk about conflict of interest, there's a definite fear factor. And this is what we've been talking about tonight, a fear factor. And it is always, I have discovered, complaints come from left field. I have never been prepared, and I've always been totally surprised. So it's an extraordinarily emotional context for all of this. This isn't business. This is emotion. This is people coming after you. It's absolutely true. And people who are on committees are often very worried in the same way. Might I say something wrong? Might my neighbor find out that I said something wrong and my reputation is hurt? So these are all the factors that are coming into play with this. Again, I agree this is a first step, and education is incredibly important. This cannot be ammunition. This has to be an education program. And it's still going to be trouble. It's just, that's the way of the world with being in politics. I personally have to develop a thicker skin, I think, I hope. But this is part of the job, and we need this to protect ourselves, to protect the people that are going to be on our committees. But they have to understand and think of it as a protection, not a way for people to go after them. So that's where the education system, to me, is huge. So I'm certainly going to vote for this, and I will help however I can to help make sure that people understand the emotional content of all that's in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Okay, so we will call the vote on item 1B, the Code of Conduct, Complaint Protocol, and Bylaw to establish an accountability framework for the City of Kingston. And that carries by a vote of 7-1. Next, we need a motion then to rise from the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Deputy Mayor Neal. So this is a motion to rise to Committee of the Whole and have the clerk report. Not sure what just happened there. That doesn't look good.
Moved by Councillor George, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that council rise from the Committee of the Whole and the clerk report.
Please vote. And that carries by a vote of 7-1.
Moved by Councillor George, seconded by Councillor McLaren. That the member code of conduct as amended and complaint protocol as amended attached as Appendix A and referenced in Exhibit A to Report 17-094 be approved, and that a bylaw 2017-XX being a bylaw to establish an accountability framework for the City of Kingston as referenced in Exhibit B be presented to Council for enactment and given its first and second readings at the March 29th, 2017 Council meeting, and that the current Code of Conduct for Council and Committee members approved by Council on September 21st, 2010 be rescinded.
Deputy Mayor Neal.
That last, that the current Code of Conduct for Council and Committee members be rescinded, should we amend that to take that away so that we have a code of conduct until we get to third reading?
Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, by approving the recommendation just read out by the Deputy Clerk, you do have a code of conduct, you do have a complaint protocol. All you have is a third reading waiting with respect to the bylaw.
Okay, so without third reading, is it the old code of conduct, or is it the new one that's approved that should go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the code of conduct as outlined in the report with the minor amendment is in play once the bylaw, actually the confirmation bylaw is passed tonight. The bylaw that's given third reading has nothing to do specifically with the code of conduct itself.
I see a lot of puzzled looks around the room. I'm wondering if we haven't codified the code of conduct. We've agreed to it in principle. It hasn't gone through a third reading process. So how could it be?
Okay. Mr. Clerk, can you clarify?
Mr. Mayor, the bylaw that is included in the report is independent of the code of conduct and the complaint protocol. The bylaw contained within the report deals with an accountability framework for the city of Kingston. It doesn't talk about the code per se with everything that's included in the new code of conduct.
My intent, if I can, Mr. Mayor, my intent in withdrawing third reading was to give council and the public an opportunity to have some reflection on what is there.
Okay. So Deputy Mayor, so here's what I would suggest. So we've heard from the clerk that as of tonight, it will be the new code of conduct that is in place. If you would prefer that the old code of conduct is instead in place, then you can put forward a motion of reconsideration. It would be a simple majority given it's the current meeting. On the other hand, there's nothing that stops us from making those changes further on, even though the new code of conduct is in place. So I'll give you procedurally, I'll give you that opportunity if you feel that you want to revert back to the old code of conduct now.
Could I indeed move an amendment to withdraw that final clause, which would mean that we have an active code of conduct, which is the original code of conduct, and will encourage the public and members of council, if they have any suggestions or recommendations, to come forward. And then when we have the third reading, we could in fact have that clause for rescinding. I'm troubled by the fact that
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that's fine. We can put something forward and we can debate it, but I just want to make clear what the process is. Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? Okay, so Deputy Mayor, I'm going to give you procedural advice, and then we can have a debate on this. So the only option at this point is to move a motion of reconsideration, put that motion back on the floor, and then defer it so that the old code of conduct is in place, and then we approve it at some additional place. Because the bylaw does not speak to the code of conduct, it only speaks to the accountability framework. So there's no way to delay the new code of conduct coming in by deferring the third reading of the bylaw. So that's the only procedural option, so I'll give you that if you want to move that motion of reconsideration.
I'll ask for an opinion, if I can, for you as chair. If we receive input from the public or any member of council wishes to amend the new code of conduct, is that going to require 2/3 in order after tonight to bring those changes forward? Because that was my intent in seeking the delay of the third reading. How would you rule on that if the public and if members of council have 2 or 3 tweaks that they want to bring forward at our next council?
Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? So the answer is it would require a motion of reconsideration that would require 2/3. Having said that, Deputy Mayor, I think that you would probably get a sense from council that there would be a willingness to move that motion of reconsideration to allow for those amendments rather than suddenly having to revert back to the old code of conduct tonight. And I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding around the table.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the
Sure.
last part of
So
that?
your concern is that if people come forward with additional amendments that they wanted, that council might want to make to the code of conduct, your concern is that a motion of reconsideration would be required that would require 2/3 majority of council to pass. Yes, that is true. However, given the looks that I'm getting around the council table, I think that there would be a willingness to move that motion of reconsideration, even though it would require 2/3, so that we can avoid having done 4 hours of work to get a new code of conduct in place to suddenly have to throw that away and go right back to the old one.
You're in a better position to see the nods and winks around the horseshoe, which I didn't necessarily see. So I will trust my colleagues and your commitment, and I will support this motion.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. So, with that, we have nothing else on our agenda, so I believe if there's no other business, Mr. Clerk, I will ask for bylaws, please. Or do we have to approve?
Mr. Mayor, I believe we still need to vote on that motion as read out by the Deputy Clerk. So could I ask everybody to vote on the recommendation as amended?
Okay. This is voting as council. Oh, I see. So now we're voting to adopt the report from Committee of the Whole. Yes, thank you. So please vote. And that carries by a vote of 7-1. Now, Mr. Clerk, I'll ask for bylaws.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaws 1 and 2 be given their first and second reading.
Please vote. And that carries.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaw number 2 be given its third reading.
Please vote.
One more, please.
No. And that carries. Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor George, seconded by Councillor Bohm. Please vote. And that carries. Thank you very much.